Chilling tales for dark nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
The elemental love of a man for his family will take queer turns at times, but for sheer horror, none of the famous tragedies of history can equal the warped affection which forms the basis of the incident I'm about to narrate. It happened in the heart of that vast uninhabited country drained by the Upper Congo, some 200 miles from civilization's nearest outpost. As a member of the Denkla Geographic Expedition, I'd spent nearly a year in the wild interior, collecting a mass of scientific data for the society we represented. While the task at hand had been a fascinating one, I could feel myself growing dull and sluggish, mentally as well as physically, under the devitalizing rays of the African sun. My notebook recalls the date as June 14th, 1890, when we emerged from the swamp-infested inland and again set eyes on the sullen waters of the dominating Congo. The sight was but a welcome one. To us it meant but a 5 days' journey to the comfort and contentment of a white man's home. We pitched our tents on the angle of land formed by a tiny rivulet and the growing expanse of the master stream. The sun had dipped far down behind the towering trees to the west by the time our camp chores were completed, and the comparative coolness of the early evening had sprung up. Wearied by the arduous tasks of the day, I indulged in a leisurely pipe and prepared to retire immediately. Upon entering my tent, I discovered, with wondering eyes, a long, gaping rent in the canvas opposite, clean cut and new. From outside there sounded the soft thud of flying feet. I plunged through the opening in time to see a dim figure disappear into the tangled undergrowth of the darkening jungle. Investigation developed that a rifle, several boxes of cartridges, and 2 scientific books, which we carried for reference, were missing. Apparently nothing else had been tampered with. A guard was mounted on the encampment that night, but the mysterious marauder never returned. Stretched out on my cot, I pondered over the puzzling occurrence for some time. That the theft had been perpetrated by a white man I knew. The form which had scurried into the leafy undercover of the jungle was not that of a dark-skinned native. This was a riddle in itself, for the men who penetrate any distance into the wilds of the world are men of purpose, who find no time for petty thievery. But the nature of the loot was as much of a wonder as the race of the man. Apparently no food had been sought. And why the books? Why the books? I could frame no satisfactory answer, and fell asleep presently, with that query weaving monotonously through my brain. High noon of our 3rd day in that locality had found me some distance inland on a little hunting excursion of my own. I'd about decided to retrace my steps back to camp when I brought up suddenly in astonishment that the section of the dark continent should harbor any civilized inhabitants was beyond belief, but away to my left, cunningly hidden behind the dense foliage of the matted trees, stood a cabin. There was no sign of human life about the place, not even the semblance of a pathway, but the very existence of a permanent, man-made shack so far removed from any settlement was mystery enough to stir the blood of any adventurous soul. I started forward slowly, with the vague idea of unearthing some strange jungle secret, and emerged presently upon a little clearing, from where I surveyed the place with doubtful eyes. Few tools and very little skill had been utilized in the erection of that cabin. There were no windows. The wall logs were undaubed and irregular, some of them jutting far out at the corners, while the ill-fitting door, sagging pathetically upon rope hinges, gave to the whole a grotesque appearance. But it was not so much the appearance of the place as the intangible atmosphere of horror enveloping it which held me. Instinctively I distrusted that abandoned silence which seemed to beckon so innocently. Some brooding evil lay hidden there, waiting with cunning patience for the springing of a trap. But like the venturesome fool I was, I approached and laid my weight cautiously against the door. To my surprise it resisted, and for a moment I speculated as to the wisdom of indulging my curiosity any further. That barred door indicated the presence of someone. Even as I hesitated, a man's soft drawling voice sounded from within, holding me rigid with amazement. "I'll paddle down to the settlement next week, honey, and see if I can't pick up some new books for you. Reckon daughter can attend you satisfactorily until I return. Now try to sleep," soothingly. "You'll feel better in a little while." Women living in this God-forsaken spot, and a man of breeding, if I were of any judge. The whole thing was preposterous, but such was the evidence my hearers had gathered. Thinking that I could possibly be of some service in case of illness, I raised the butt end of my rifle and rapped. A deep silence followed. For a moment I experienced that unpleasant sensation of being passed upon by hidden eyes, and then the door slowly opened. Involuntarily I recoiled a step, scarcely knowing what to expect. A tall, broad-shouldered man appeared. There was in his carriage a certain flash of dignity which could not be concealed by the tattered garments he wore. His hair was gray and fell in wild disorder to his shoulders, framing a countenance seamed by years of suffering. For a moment he regarded me with deep-set, weary eyes. Then, "You are welcome, sir," he said, quietly in the same soft-toned drawl, and stood aside me to enter. I did so, feeling vaguely that the whole occurrence was a fragment of some senseless dream. The interior was fitfully illuminated by the daylight which filtered in between the undaubed logs, revealing a picture of strange barrenness. Except for a few sawed-off logs, evidently serving as chairs, and a large upturned box in the center, the room was bare of furnishings. Across one end of the structure was draped a long black cloth, which no doubt concealed the women. My strange host closed the door without barring it, and when I turned, I found his eyes searching me with an unfathomable expression which was decidedly unpleasant. "You'll pardon my intrusion," I said a bit awkwardly. "I spied your cabin on my way back to camp and thought I could be of some service. My name is Brent." "Glad to meet you, sir," he answered. "Visitors are a rare luxury with us. My name is Warner, Colonel Warner of Kentucky." There was a surprising power in his handclasp. "Unfortunately, the women are somewhat indisposed at present, but I'll tell them that you called, Mr. Brent. Won't you be seated, sir?" I sank down upon the nearest log, a highly perplexed man. The formality of it all would have been laughable were it not for the serious dignity of this surprising colonel. So far as he was concerned, we might have met in the drawing-room of some southern mansion. As for myself, I could not throw off the sense of tragedy which seemed to lurk beneath the surface. Visibly there was nothing to fear, but the events of the last few minutes were too unnatural to put me at ease. Of a sudden my roving eyes settled on the familiar lines of a pair of shabby-looking books resting on the box close by. I stared, and the colonel, evidently noticing my gaze, took up one of the volumes. "An excellent discourse, sir," said he, proffering me the volume, "but highly technical. Have you ever read it?" I thumbed the well-known cover. On the flyleaf, in my own handwriting, appeared my scrawly signature, James W. Brent. One of the best treatises on the subject in existence, I declared. Decidedly. I got it only a few days ago for Miss Warner. She loves books, but finds reading a hardship. Her sight is dim. So I read things aloud to her. We found that very interesting, sir. With a sigh, which was half moan, he subsided upon a log near the opposite wall, and I returned the book to its companion. Undoubtedly it was my own, but I found it difficult to believe that this well-bred gentleman, however peculiar, had committed the theft. I gazed at him curiously and found him staring vacantly into space with sagging jaw. Finally he spoke in a queer, detached manner. Colonel Warner. It seems like ages since I heard that name. The Mad Colonel. That's what they call me. Then suddenly, have you ever heard them tell of the Mad Colonel? I had not. No matter. And he waved his hand in dismission of the thought. You would not feel so secure in my presence with their wild tales running through your brain. I am not mad, and his tone was a shade of wonder. Only the victim of a terrible vengeance. Do you see those pictures, Mr. Brent? I'd overlooked them before, 2 small photographs, framed in black, hanging on a wall behind me. One of an elderly lady, beautiful beyond doubt, the other of a captivating youngster. My family, Mr. Brent. His eyes fairly glowed with the pleasure of the telling, but promptly recovered their weary expression. We were happy once back in Kentucky. A rich family and well known, but disaster overtook us in the shape of a hopeless maniac, Andrew Lang. For a moment he was silent, staring down at the floor with bent head, his gray hair falling about his face. I glanced around, trying to conjure up some excuse for leaving. I had no desire to probe into his family secrets. Besides, that tense atmosphere of horror that overhung the place was anything but reassuring. I wanted to be gone, rather the wild things of the jungle than to be cooped up with what? I did not know, but I could sense some hidden terror, and involuntarily my eyes wandered to that crepe-like drapery which divided the cabin. I started to speak, but his soft voice interrupted, ignoring me completely. I was telling you of Andrew Lang, the madman. I trusted him like a brother, and thought he was grateful until I discovered his perfidy. Lies and soft-tongued entreaties were his stock in trade. It was Mrs. Warner he wanted, sir. Cunning indeed were his methods. I killed him. I could scarcely repress a shudder. The whole thing was beginning to get on my nerves, but I could not stay his soft-toned drawl. Insanity had been in the family blood of Andrew Lang. All 4 of his sons were afflicted. For years they haunted me from place to place, vowing to avenge their father's death with cruel torture. But I felt justified. The honor of the Warner name, my wife's happiness, my little Helen. His voice trembled. Tears started to his eyes. Then he drew himself erect with military dignity. Legally, I am a murderer, sir, and the law would not protect me from those 4 warped brains. I fled the country with my little family and took refuge here, in the heart of the jungle, where I thought I would be safe. But those cunning brains found me at last. His shoulders drooped and his form relaxed into the very picture of despair. When he spoke again, his voice was dull, expressionless. First one came, then the other, disguised, but I knew them, and in self-defense, I killed them. For a moment I thought the man was mad. His tale was fantastic enough, but one look at his forlorn figure seemed to reassure me. Sorrow and suffering were all the picture held. I was about to utter some words of sympathy when the door of the shack flew open and a harsh voice intruded. I started erect with quickened pulse. Framed in the doorway was a man clad in the khaki of the Border Rangers. One hand was poised lightly on the automatic in his belt. His eyes burned with triumph as they rested on the bent figure of the colonel, who had scarcely moved. "So we've got you at last," grimly. "At last," echoed the colonel, dully. "And a hell of a chase it was. 2 others were not so successful. You have no idea what happened to them." It was more of an accusation than a question. "I killed them, as I will you," was the colonel's toneless reply. "Why, damn your mad hide!" exploded the stranger wrathfully. Mad? Mad?" The colonel was on his feet with wildly glaring eyes, his hands working spasmodically. "You call me mad?" Suddenly he leapt forward, and one powerful arm shot out. Recoiling a step, the stranger whipped out his automatic. Simultaneously, I brought the butt of my rifle down on his arm. Something cracked. A low moan escaped his lips, and his weapon clattered to the floor. Then the colonel was upon him, his powerful hands clutched in a death grip on the stranger's throat. I tried to pull him off. It was useless. The stranger's face turned purple, and his body sagged. Then the colonel's rage subsided, and with a hissing intake of breath, he let his victim slip through his hands into a lifeless heap on the floor. A sickening nausea swept me at the hideous sight. I shuddered and turned away. The colonel seized my hand in his, and I could feel him tremble. "Thank you, sir," he whispered. "God only knows what would have become of my family. He was the third." His voice faltered, and my heart went out to him in pity in spite of the murder just committed. Then, with a sudden movement, he turned and bent over the dead body of his enemy. Grasping the limp form beneath the armpits, he started to drag it across the rough boards of the cabin, and presently disappeared behind that mysterious barrier of black without a backward glance. A gruesome object to lay before the eyes of that unseen family of his. I studied that swaying curtain with puzzled eyes, trying to penetrate its secrets, and gradually grew conscious of a thin stream of red slowly oozing from beneath its low-hanging folds. I stared motionless, my brain beset with wild imaginations. Surely that slowly creeping line of red was blood. What thing of evil had I stumbled upon? What horror did that stable cloth conceal? I tiptoed across the floor and gently pulled back the curtain at one side. A weird sight met my eyes. The colonel was kneeling before an upturned box, his body bent like a worshipper before a shrine. Beside him, where he knelt, rested 3 shaggy human heads, one still wet with blood, while a decapitated form in blood-stained khaki lay huddled in a far corner. I heard the colonel speak, a horribly elated whisper. "You're safe, honey. He'll never get you. He can't. We'll fool them all. All." And he laughed. I stared with something akin to fascination at the repulsive sight. Suddenly he turned, sensing my presence. "Come in, sir," he cried. "Come in and meet the family. Mrs. Warner and little Helen." I saw that his eyes were bulging and his face working in a frenzy of maniacal emotion. With a cat-like movement he sprang to his feet, disclosing the idols of his worship, his family resting sphinx-like on the box before him. 2 empty, grinning skulls. A terrible weakness assailed me as I staggered away from that place of madness into the sanity of broad daylight. 5 days later, on arriving at the settlement downstream, I learned that 3 rangers had been sent out after the Mad Colonel somewhere up the river and that none had returned. I held my peace.
A Creeping Suspicion by Dave Capp. Something sure does smell good. I walked behind my wife, Kristen, and kissed her on the neck as the smell of fat and nitrates enticingly danced into my nostrils.
Thought you might like a nice breakfast this morning.
Kristen took a sip of coffee and smiled. She still looked the same as when we lived together in college 13 years ago. Maybe it was the oversized sweater she wore, or maybe it was because her blonde hair still shimmered like a morning sun. But ever since my first dive into her gray-blue eyes, she's been my world. You thought correct. I began to pile a plate with enough bacon to build my own Frankenstein pig.
Toast?
Kristen asked as she ran her fingers through my thick brown forest of curls. Not even waiting for an answer, she popped 2 slices of rye bread into the toaster. Flipping 2 over-medium eggs onto my plate, I chuckled.
Hey.
Her face flushed like a ripening tomato. No, nothing. I began to chew on a strip of bacon. Why do I feel like I'm being courted?
Maybe because you are?
Well, you're doing a great job. Kristen sat down in front of me and smiled. This was always her thing. Whenever my lovely wife wanted to tell me something I may not like, I'd always get softened up with a meal. Judging by the amount of bacon she had fried up, it was easy to see that she was going to drop a bomb. The wooden chair groaned when I sat down at the kitchen table. I didn't even have a chance to pepper my egg whites before my wife slid into the seat in front of me.
So,
she started as she handed me a mug of coffee.
2 things.
2? You better whip up some pancakes then. And get the good syrup, not the high fructose corn garbage. I joked.
I'm going to accept the offer.
Kristen squeaked out before she hid behind her coffee mug. Oh.
And?
She stammered as if she didn't want to finish the sentence. And what?
I'm starting tomorrow.
I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. It felt as though my tongue had doubled in size. Oh, could I think, though? Closing my eyes tight, a young man in a slim-fitting navy suit stood before me. He was muscular, with dark eyes, chestnut brown hair, and a jawline to sharpen a razor. Hello, sir. He stuck out a hand. Then I opened my eyes and remembered that the young man didn't exist anymore. That young man had died long ago. That young man had promised his wife the world, but only delivered a gas station convenience store snow globe. That's so exciting, I was finally able to say. Kristen gave me a sort of half smile.
Well, don't get too excited. Wouldn't want to have the neighbors call the police.
We have no neighbors, I grumbled as I prodded the yolk of an egg with my fork. A pool of yellow filled up the plate, soaking the rest of my breakfast.
I know. It was a joke.
I know what it was. At first, Kristen rolled her eyes, but then they narrowed upon me.
Well, don't you think you could be...
She stood.
I don't know, happy for me?
I am happy for you, and proud of you, Chris. I'm sorry, it's just been frustrating for me. Good to know at least one of us is doing well, right? I tried my hardest to sound enthused. Laugh lines creased on Kristen's face.
Oh my god, thank you. Thank you, Hunter Benson. I'll be making more than I did at my old job, like a lot more.
She paused.
The next go-round, you'll pass the bar, and by that time, I'll have new connections here.
Absolutely. I smiled. I finally realized why my wife looked the same as in college. She didn't look the same. No, that wasn't it. It was because she still saw me as the 22-year-old boy who had the world by the balls. You know, you're right, Chris. We'll be the super couple of law. They'll make a reality show about us.
That's what I'm saying, babe.
She poured herself another cup of coffee.
Kind of want to celebrate. I'm going to pour some Irish cream in here.
I know what you're asking yourself. How did this asshole wind up with her? If you were to look up the definition of perfect partner in the dictionary, you'd see a picture of my wife. Anyone would do anything to be with her. And trust me, after being together almost 15 years, I've seen a whole lot of things. After graduating from law school, Kristen and I moved to the big city. My beautiful wife had a job as a junior attorney all lined up for herself in Manhattan. On the other hand, I couldn't even pass the bar exam. Finally, I conceded that city life wasn't for me. It was for Kristen, though. She loved the city that never slept. She's one of those girls that like shopping on Christmas Eve. And because of me, my saint of a wife left her city and followed me into the dark. We moved to Lake George, where my family owned a run-down vacation home. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. This once rich white kid who spent his entire life in suburbia has now fled to the mountains because he couldn't handle the idea of making his mother and father's school debt worth it. Oh, by the way, my parents paid for my undergrad and law degrees. Seriously, they would have been better flushing their money down the toilet. Maybe Pennywise could have become a doctor.
Then we can, fix this place up. It'll be a great home to raise a family.
She placed her empty mug down and ran her fingers over my chest. Hey, you know what? I stood abruptly. While you're gone during the day, I can start on my own renovations. It's about time I opened the old shed up again. Kristen led me into the living room and sprawled out onto the couch.
Oh yes, that is definitely what you should open.
I awoke before Kristen, who didn't seem to notice the sun's orange beam blaring through the living room window. Finding my shorts, I stretched and made for the back door. The tiny hill that led to the shed was filled with roots, all of which had the same intention of tripping anyone who stepped over them. Luckily, the key to this box of rotten termite scraps was still under the same rock that it had been since the dawn of time. Or at least since my family had come here for a summer vacation. When I got the shed open, a shotgun immediately fell out and onto the ground in front of me. I opened the chamber and saw one shell. The next thing I noticed was an old rowboat. Pulling it out into the open air, I could almost hear laughter as if a lifetime of happy memories were preserved in the boat's wood. After finding an old fishing rod and digging out enough earthworms to fill half a coffee tin, I brought the boat into the lake. I figured I could come back with a couple of fish to fry up, and have another round in the ring with Kristen afterward. I was out on the water for 5 hours. The sky had turned from a hazy orange to a deep bruise purple, and I didn't catch a single fish. Rocking back and forth on the water didn't come close to creating a sense of comfort. No, it boiled a pot of anger. Past the bar, Kristen had no idea that ship had sailed away, like my family after giving me the parting gift of this lake house. Of course I couldn't pass the bar. It was something I had to do on my own. Mommy and Daddy couldn't get me out of this one. What an utter failure I had become. This is the man that the perfect partner is stuck with. Maybe she isn't so perfect after all. I screamed until my throat felt like it was wrapped in sandpaper. And after it grew hoarse, I screamed some more. You would think that watching the sunset would have helped me cool down. Nope. I hated sunsets. I know. What kind of crazy nutjob says he hates sunsets? Well, to most, sunset is one of nature's greatest beauties. To me, it meant another wasted day. And as I thought about that day, I realized that sunrise would only be bringing another day to waste. 3 long months passed. That's 90 days. So to me, that's 90 wasted days. It didn't even seem to faze me anymore. If Kristen wasn't working late for her boss, Ronald Tercy, she was going in early. Morning quickies were replaced with patterned pecks. The conversation became passing grunts fit for a subway terminal. And meals were frozen piles of mystery meat and soggy carrots. Every day I would tell Kristen that I was studying, or maybe I would fix that leaky faucet, but it was never true. I'd take the test in the winter, fail, and be at the exact same spot I was now. Maybe you could tell me what exactly is the point of it all. My main comfort was now the rowboat. Every day I would go out onto the water, lay down with my hat over my face, and sleep the day away. Of course, I tried to be productive, but it was pointless. I had never lived for myself. I went to college for my parents, law school for Kristen, and now I had no idea what I wanted. Kristen was the only beacon of hope for me in the endlessly twisting path that was my life. And, well, with her gone for sometimes 3/4 of any given day, I was lost. One night, a cricket song woke me from my stupor. I opened my eyes to a shimmering night. The moon seemed to be smiling down at me as it wrapped the world in a blanket of silver starlight. My watch read 11:47, and I immediately sat up. Rowing with all my might, I made it back to shore, eager to spend a little time with Kristen. She wasn't in the living room or the kitchen. Then I remembered the time and realized she must have gone to bed. Maybe I could wake her for a few quick minutes of fun before I fell back into a sleepless dream again. Our bed was empty. A whirl of thoughts spun around my head before screaming in my face. Did she get in an accident? I ran down the steps to check the driveway, and it too was empty. Oh no! My voice cracked. Oh no! I repeated. Trying to compose myself, I took a deep breath. Let's not jump to conclusions, Hunt, I said. I went into the kitchen and poured myself a cold glass of water. I stumbled into the living room and fell onto the couch, spilling water all over my chest. I took another deep breath and noticed the blinking red light on our answering machine. I was afraid to press play. Can you believe that? My wife, the love of my life, could have been hurt, or worse, and I was afraid to find out, afraid to face any sort of reality. Finally, I mustered up the courage and pressed play. There was a loud scream that made the speaker crackle. It sounded twisted. It sounded possessed. Did it sound drunk? The scream turned into a giddy woo, and I began to laugh.
Hunt, I'm sorry, but...
Kristen's voice was my favorite song, one that I would love to leave on repeat until the end of time.
Get off! Give me that back!
She said to someone. A gruff mumble answered.
Hunt, I'm sorry, but the dinner ran late. Mr. Tercy,
The same voice mumbled again.
Ron, took the team out for drinks afterward. I'll be home close to midnight.
Kristen slurred.
I love you.
Close to midnight, I muttered. Well, that should be now. In case you haven't noticed, I've started to talk to myself quite a lot over the last 3 months. You try being by yourself all day and tell me you don't need someone to talk to. Then, I heard my voice. At least, I think it was my voice. I didn't feel myself speaking the words, but it sounded like me. Well, it sounded like me if I had just finished chain-smoking a pack of cigarettes.
Home late again?
Yeah, that's what she has to do, I answered.
She goes in early and comes home late. Even works weekends.
Right, she's making our dream a reality.
Oh? Your dream?
My dream. My dream is for my wife to be happy.
Your wife who spends no time with you anymore. Even in the city, she worked all day and night. She worked to stay away from you.
That's not true. I laughed nervously.
You know what she's doing. What she's always done.
No. There's no way she would betray me. She loves me.
Odd way to show love, wouldn't you say? She created a dream for you and has ignored you ever since.
So she's...
Probably right now. You heard that voice. A man's voice.
I rewound the answering machine.
Hun, I'm sorry.
I pressed rewind, then pressed play.
Hun, I'm sorry.
The spinning sound of the tape rewinding made my flesh crawl, made my jaw tighten so tight that I thought my teeth would crack out of my gums. But I still kept pressing rewind and play, rewind and play, rewind and fucking play.
Hun, I'm sorry. Hun, I'm sorry. Hun, I'm sorry.
You're right, I rasped.
You've always known.
Of course, she would want another.
Easy choice, right? Rich, powerful, driven, versus you.
Headlights flashed in the driveway at 1:45. I opened the door to greet my wife with a mask of a smile. Waving to the driver, Mr. Tercy, I opened the passenger door to be slapped in the face with the smell of bourbon.
Hunt!
Kristen cried as she wrapped her arms around my neck. Thank you for taking her home, Ron. Ronald Tercy seemed thrown off by my knowledge of his name. He had held a hand out to shake, but didn't say a word. I ignored his gesture and kissed my wife.
So I have a surprise.
Kristen giggled. What's that?
My sister is coming tomorrow.
Oh, well, I'll have to clean up the guest room then. I helped Kristen get out of the car. I watched my wife as she smiled at the man in the sleazy 3-piece suit and brushed past me to go inside. Tell you what, Ron, how about you stay the night? It's not safe to drive on the roads this late.
Yeah, my brother is a sergeant in Schenectady. I'll be just fine.
You can still crash. Your brother's name wouldn't help you there, I whispered. He thought for a moment, then threw the car into park.
You know, you're right. Thanks for your concern, Hunter.
Together, we walked inside without saying a word. Kristen was in the kitchen sipping on a bottle of water.
Oh.
She coughed. Ron is going to stay the night.
That's great.
And I can drive you to get your car in the morning. Tall and dark with broad shoulders, Ronald stuck his chest out proudly, as if he had come up with the idea on his own. Kristen nodded.
Sure.
Chris, I'm going to show your boss the boat. I didn't wait for my wife to respond. Hey, pass us a few cold ones. You up for a nightcap?
You know it.
My wife's boss answered, taking a bottle of beer from her. Walking out into the darkness, I beckoned Ron to pass in front of me. After you, good sir. Of course, the asshole didn't object. When we passed the shed, I stopped. Oh, keep going. I'll be right there. I bent down to fiddle with my shoelaces. Slowly, I reached for the shotgun. Grabbing it by the barrel, I stood up and aimed. Trust me, I know it's cowardly to shoot a man in the back, but so is stealing a man's wife.
It'll be too loud.
It doesn't matter. No one will hear.
Kristen won't hear a gunshot?
What was that?
A voice came from the bottom of the hill. Nothing. I tossed the shotgun down to the ground and saw a stone. The same stone that I lifted to find the key to the shed.
Boy, this is paradise.
Ronald Tercy said as he took a sip of beer. As the rowboat began to rock back and forth, he stretched his arms up in the air and placed them behind his head.
Quite the life you got here, Hunt.
I'm sure you've got it good too, I mumbled.
Yeah, but nothing beats this. Tiny house in the lake and a lovely wife is the recipe for happiness.
I furrowed my brow. Are you married?
Divorced.
He took another sip of beer and fixed his sight upon the moon. I fiddled with the stone in my pocket and found a pointed end. Pressing my pointer finger into it, I felt a slight sting of pain.
What are you waiting for?
Come again? When Ronald Tercy sat up, I smashed him in the face with the rock, shattering his mouth into a cave of bloody splinters. For a moment, he tried to lift his hands to fight back, but I swung once again, this time landing my blow on his temple. He fell onto his back, and I leapt on top of him. I punched and stabbed and punched and punched and stabbed until there was nothing left of the man's head except bits of skull, brains, soaked in a pool of blood. I had no idea what to do with the body. Should I bury him?
Burying him would be the more respectful way to dispose of him. You don't want that.
I nodded. Still leaking from the bloody ruin of his face, I tossed the man's lifeless body into my shed, locked it up, and threw the key into the lake. The trail of blood glittered in the silvery moonlight, making everything seem magical. Everything just felt so right. Still painted in blood, I crept up the stairs to my bedroom. Kristen was asleep and was wearing the most beautiful smile.
That's a smile that knows a secret.
I know. I grabbed my pillow and pressed it over her face. This time, I was in control of her life. If I wanted to, I could lift the pillow and let her taste the sweet nectar of air. But we all know that wasn't happening. A knock on the front door woke me. I looked to my right to see Kristen. Her skin was the color of milk, her mouth and eyes open like she had been petrified. I rose and stumbled into the bathroom to splash water on my face. The man in the mirror seemed to glow. This was what a proud man looked like. This was what a successful man looked like. Was I afraid of who was at the door? Was I scared of getting caught? Absolutely not.
Jesus!
Kristen's sister, Wendy, cried when I opened the door. Oh, hey, Wen, come on in. The sky behind her was just beginning to transform into a swirl of yellow, orange, and red. Wendy stood frozen on the threshold.
What are you? Is that blood?
I looked down and noticed that my body was covered in crusty brown patches of victim number 1's blood. There were probably some brains mixed in there too. Yup, I answered. Went hunting. Let's just say I shouldn't quit my day job and become a butcher.
I'll say. Try a supermarket next time, Rambo.
Wendy smirked.
Here.
She handed me a stack of mail that had been ignored for well over a month.
Kristen here? I didn't see her car.
No, she'll be back soon. Come on in, let me get you a drink. Wendy slipped past me and into the kitchen. I thumbed through credit card offers and fast food menus until I came upon an envelope addressed to Kristen Benson from Ronald Tercy. Ripping it open, 2 tickets fell onto the floor. I tore the rest of the envelope apart and found a note. Kristen, I wanted to give you and your husband a gift to show my appreciation. You always talk about how life was in the big city, so I figured you two could take a few days soaking in the lights of the city that never sleeps. Enclosed are 2 tickets to The Lion King. Please enjoy, and make sure to come to me for a credit card. I do not want you or Hunter spending a dime in the Big Apple. My chest tightened as I picked up the 2 Broadway tickets. See, here is where I should have realized the monster I had become. It would have been appropriate for me to drop to my knees and sob at the mistake I made. Who knows? Maybe even go outside and wrap my lips around the barrel of Daddy's shotgun. Hey, Wen, I said, stepping into the kitchen. Wendy took a swig of beer.
Hey, Hunt.
Let's go out back. The sun's about to set.
After lunch, I went back into my living quarters and drew a triangle. Between each corner of the triangle, I wrote our names out. I was at the top of the triangle. On the bottom 2 corners, I wrote Rosie and Kenneth. Rosie and Kenneth hated each other. I liked Rosie, but I didn't like Kenneth. Kenneth liked me, but hated Rosie. The word hate was written at the bottom of the triangle. The word hate rang out in my mind. Hate being such a stronger word than like. Like, at the same time, being so timid in comparison to hate. Love was too extreme for 2 people I had known for 2 weeks, but like was so tame next to hate that it almost didn't belong. Lunch was preceded by a jab in the arm, a new trial vaccination. We don't even know what the vaccination is for. And any time we ask the question, the answers are so dense and conflated that we wished we'd never asked. I share my living quarters with Rosie and Kenneth. Now that a triangle of like and hate has been formed, there's a bipolar atmosphere of intense melancholia. But we all agreed on one thing, hating the staff at the facility. The facility is reminiscent of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Think 20 Nurse Ratcheds in a small test center, all of us walking around in white gowns like fucking morons. At the same time, nobody is insane. Nobody has been committed. We're all here on our own volition. I look back at the paper and hand-drawn wonky triangle that I made. I write on the line beneath the word hate. Hate is a mirror onto ourselves. I hate Kenneth because he reminds me of all the things that I hate about myself. He's loud, he's greedy, he's selfish, he's a narcissist, and he's obnoxious. On the next line, I write, "Fuck your $10,000. I look long and hard at my chaotic ramblings. Then I screw up the piece of paper and eat it. The paper's jagged edges hit against the back of my throat. The paper slides down my esophagus covered in a digestive ooze. At dinner, Kenneth has a chessboard lined up next to his plate. He wants to play. I barely know the rules. Kenneth slaps my hand every time I try to leapfrog another piece the way you do in checkers. This irritates me to no end. Kenneth gets more and more frustrated at trying to teach me how to play the game until he eventually loses his rag and throws his queen against the floor. The queen bounces back up against the hard floor. I eat my hamburger. The nurses stare at us enthusiastically, urging us to eat up. I feel like I'm in an orphanage. Nurse Winslow approaches with a ready-prepared syringe. She stares down at Kenneth.
"Time for your jab,"
she says. She pokes Kenneth in the arm and dabs at the piercing with damp cotton. Kenneth has calmed down after his jab. The game of chess is no longer bothering him. Seeing Kenneth's dopey, insolent post-jab face in the common fog winds me up more than when he's his usual obnoxious, loud-mouthed, pea-brained self. "Fuck your jab," I say, and I slam my plate against the table and storm back to our room. I've been irritated all day today. The last thing I want is a post-dinner jab. An hour later, Nurse Peacock is at the foot of my bed.
"Now, Jimmy, you know that if you refuse a single jab, you don't get paid for any of this. It makes all the previous jabs a waste of your time."
$10,000 is a lot to walk away from. I remind myself why I'm doing this stupid trial.
"We can discharge you today if you like,"
she says.
"and we can write you a check for your travel expenses."
I pull my sleeve up and offer my arm. She puts the jab right between the eyes of the tiger tattoo I got when I was 17. She dabs it with cotton gently. I like the cold feel of wet cotton. My arm's been jabbed so many times that there's big pock marks forming, making the tattooed tiger resemble a Hindu god. I could never get a good night's rest here, and my dreams are more vivid and hallucinatory than I ever remember having in my life. Last night I dreamed I was the queen bee in a thriving hive. Other bees would swarm around me and drip nectar down my throat until I fattened up to the point of combustion. When I finally burst open, about 1,000,000 tiny scorpions sprawled out from my bee-like innards. The scorpions then descended upon and ate my army of servile bees. It was a massacre. Anything bee-like had been devoured and devastated. When I awoke, I pulled the sheets back and half expected my legs to be a mesh of scorpion bites and bee stings. When I was a child just starting secondary, one of the local kids from my area took a live kitten between his palms and crushed its skull for all our benefit. Blood and brain matter oozed out of the cat's ear hole. It was the most disgusting sight I'd ever seen. The boy went on to a juvenile center for animal cruelty. I think he's dead now. I forget his name. The image of this is now haunting me inside my own head. It happened 21 years ago. I've barely thought about it since it happened, but the amount of inactivity at the facility has caused my brain to regress into an obsessive thought process. I can't stop thinking about the dead cat, the squeeze and pop of its skull and the brain seeping out of its ear hole. I tell Kenneth about my dream, and he just stares at me in a blank, dozy gaze, which pisses me off. I tell him the cat story. He shrugs it off, raises two fat, bushy eyebrows quickly, and then goes back to his game of mahjong solitaire. He then tells me that he slept with over 100 women, and that 2 weeks without sex has given him blue balls. We're just not on the same page. Rosie fulfills my emotional needs. She listens to me. I tell her about my dreams. I tell her about the cat's skull and the brain seeping out of the cat's ear. She gives me the acknowledgement I desperately crave, at least by listening alone.
"They're giving us psychotropics. The things you're describing are visions,"
Rosie says. "They're making me sick," I say.
"If you're feeling so disturbed right now, you should just leave."
I can't. I need the money.
Do you need the money that much?
I need to buy a house, I say. I haven't asked her while she's doing the clinical trials. I tell her that I'd do almost anything right now for a house. Anything besides hard work, dedication, responsibility, and financial frugality, which means a clinical trial. She laughs. The ignition in her eye between laughs reminds me of why I like Rosie. I show her my pock-marked arm, the result of the constant jabs.
You shouldn't worry about your arm,
Rosie says. Why?
The hallucinogens aren't in the injection going into your arm. They're in the food.
Rosie lifts up her shirt and proceeds to tell me that she's lost 12 pounds just this week.
The jabs are a placebo. It's in the food.
Her rib cage is trying to force its way out of her stomach. The shape of it reminds me of the scorpions bursting through the stomach of the queen bee. I was the queen bee. Nurse Peacock has started watching me with intent and shrewd eyes. She's noticed me cutting down drastically on the food they serve. She noticed when I passed 3/4 of my plate to Kenneth. Kenneth, on the other hand, cannot stop eating. A gluttonous parasite has forced its way into him. As he eats my burger, the corners of his mouth are dripping with cow fat and mayonnaise. He doesn't wipe his mouth. He sat there for 15 minutes with goo running down the corners of his mouth. The repulsion staves off my hunger, at least. I look across the canteen, through the crowds of white-gowned trialists scarfing on their burgers, dipping their chips in ketchup. I focus on Nurse Peacock. She's staring. She's staring. She's staring. She's staring. Her eyes narrow to the size of 2 miniaturized demonic pearls. Her eyes frighten me. Why are they giving us LSD? I ask Rosie.
Who said it was LSD?
Rosie says. What's the point of all this? I ask. Rosie tells me we're in some kind of Milgram experiment. The aim isn't to vaccinate or create drugs like the advert said. The aim is to see how low the depths of our human psyche can go with forced intoxication and an ugly atmosphere. As Rosie tells me this, there's a ferocity and pain within her eyes. I really think she needs to eat. You said something to me about discharging, I said. Why don't you?
I asked,
she said. And? They tell me that I need a double dose that evening. Kenneth is playing poker by himself, raising bets and throwing down poker chips, trying to outbluff himself. Rosie lies on the bed. She's semi-catatonic. A paperback book is sprawled on her stomach, but she can barely muster the energy to pick it up, let alone read it. Her eyes are closed, but her breath has the nimble sprite of being awake. She succumbed to that half-dream, half-awake dead zone. Nurse Flynn rolls up my sleeve and pricks me twice with the same needle. She doesn't sterilize before, during, or after the jabs. I'm asleep within about 2 minutes of the jabs. This time I dream that I'm standing at the shoreline holding an egg. A rusty brown, corroded spoon is in my hand. I crack the top of the egg and peer inside. The inside of the egg contains an eye, an all-seeing, pervasive, haunting human eye. The waves rise up and crash into the shore. The water takes me, the egg, and the eye with it into the sea. I wake to see Kenneth sitting at the end of the bed. He's banging a ping-pong bat against a ball tied to a string. It's time for group therapy, Kenneth says. Dr. Jurgen sits facing out towards us three. Rosie, Kenneth, and I sit in a semicircle encompassing him. Rosie is drained of all color and vibrancy. I remember that day I first saw her. Her hair was in bangs. She walked with a confident beatnik flair. Now she's sickly white. She's skinny and gaunt. She's dry. Her skin makes me thirsty just by looking at the cracked dehydration. Kenneth and I had to carry her into the therapy suite and throw her down on the chair. Kenneth is the opposite to Rosie. He's fattened up, plump, and ripe. His cheeks are bright red, and he's breaking out into damp sweats. I imagine I must be somewhere in the middle of these two extremes. Kenneth is working on a Rubik's Cube. That is, until Dr. Jurgen gives a low, delicate cough, a small plea for Kenneth's attention. Kenneth looks up at Dr. Jurgen.
This is merely a formality of the experimentation to see how your living arrangements are going, and to see how you're responding to the treatment,
Dr. Jurgen says.
We tick the boxes, keep the insurance companies happy.
Rosie's head slumps onto her own shoulder, and a line of saliva from her lip to the shoulder descends and drops. Dr. Jurgen doesn't even react to it. He's got a clipboard and a pen behind his ear. Jurgen is a purebred stereotype of a doctor. Kenneth starts. He makes it all about him again. He blathers on for 10 minutes, telling Dr. Jurgen about the isolation he feels from the group, and that Rosie and I are purposely shunning him like we're on an Amish farm. One look at the half-dead Rosie, and you'd realize there isn't much of a group to be isolated from. He compares the isolation to his experiences in secondary school, and by the end of his monologue, he's weeping into his hands and bemoaning how he's never been taken seriously his entire life. His eyes are red, and he's smearing his palm into his eyeballs to wipe away the tears, mixing it with the sweat. Before Dr. Jurgen can turn to me to ask me if I have any rebuttal or response to Kenneth's biographic tragedy, Kenneth is interrupting again and again. Dr. Jurgen can barely get a flow going, so he just gives up. Kenneth tells me and Dr. Jurgen, and Rosie for what it's worth, that this isn't worth the 10 grand, and that the whole clinical trial is just one long line of poor choices and mistakes. We finish up with Dr. Jurgen asking me how I'm feeling at the moment. Well, that fucking nurse keeps watching me, I say. Rosie's head lolls over and her body follows. She falls off her chair and lands face down onto the carpet. I tried not eating, but I just can't do it. The grotesque images and imaginings were weaker when I stopped eating, but my empty stomach was rotting away, and the hunger pains would cascade throughout my entire body right up into my fingertips. So I eat. Not with the gusto I had when I first arrived here. I eat in small, delicate increments, just enough to keep me alive, and once I eat, the images and sights come back immediately. I've now started dreaming about Nurse Peacock's eyes, her eyes shining, a strobe light pulsing in vulgar flashes of green and blue, piercing through me at every turn and every junction within this clinic. Those eyes pervade my dreams, shining through the distorted static of my television screen as though I'm back in my Texas home. I wake in the night, and through the glass windows of the bedroom door, I see Nurse Peacock in the hallway peering into my room. Those eyes fill me with torment and terror. When I close my own eyes, I see the brains of that cat seeping out of its ear. I'm haunted by images of gore and permeation. Kenneth and I return to our room after dinner, and Rosie is laid out across the bed with the drip feed next to her. Nurse Peacock is standing over Rosie and toying around with the wires and entry ports. She flicks one of the tubes with a delicate middle finger in a gesture of pure cinematic cliché. Nurse Fallon barges past me, carting another IVF and tutting to herself. She pulls the wires out from the IVF stand and looks bemused as to where to even begin. Nurse Peacock grabs the IVFs from her immediately.
Poor thing, poor thing, poor thing.
Nurse Fallon is muttering. I walk up to the side of Rosie and gently touch her hand. She turns to me, and with a fear and revulsion deep in her eyes, she can barely say the words, but she manages.
You can't discharge.
It's clear to me that her death is imminent. Nurse Peacock walks over to me and shoos me away.
Come on, away from here. Let her be.
Nurse Peacock says. It's just a clinical trial, I say. This shouldn't be happening.
It's nothing to do with the trial. The girl isn't eaten. That's her choice. Now get the hell away.
Her eyes narrow, and the ambulance beam a vicious purple. I back off and walk over to my bunk. Kenneth is sat on my bed, clumsily flinging a yo-yo back and forth in ugly strides.
Anything happens to Rosie, we can all sue for witnessing it,
Kenneth says.
It'll be emotional trauma. Can get more than just that $10,000. I know a lawyer. If she dies, let's sue the clinic.
The $10,000. That fucking $10,000. I spotted the advertisement for the clinical trials online on Gumtree. My girlfriend had just left me. I was 38, and we were still renting a squalor of an apartment in East Dallas. We'd been renting that place for 16 years. I'd worked the same job for 12 years, on the same wage for 9 years. She'd gotten sick of my lack of backbone. I knew that if I got the deposit for a mortgage, I could win her back and finally have a place I could call my own. It was supposed to be easy. It was supposed to be 1 month of testing out a vaccine for $10,000. Now I'm witnessing one of my roommates dying. I'm plagued with bad dreams, and the nurses are watching my every fucking move. I wake in the night and crawl over to Rosie's bed. "Why can't you discharge from here?" I ask. The thought of her saying this was keeping me awake. She didn't respond. I lifted up her arm. I looked into her face. Her mouth is open. Her eyes are open. She's dead. Rosie is dead. She starved herself to death. I crawled back into bed and pulled the covers back over myself. I don't call for help. I can't call for help. $10,000. Nurse Peacock stands over me. My eyes are shuddering open slowly into wakefulness. Peacock's eyes immediately perforate into my inner sanctimony. First fucking thing I see are those eyes. Last thing at night and first thing in the morning. Nurse Peacock is smiling. She has an ugly and crooked smile.
I'm afraid we've had to discharge that lovely young lady you shared the room with. The clinical trials just weren't for her, and she wasn't feeling well. She will, of course, not get paid now.
I have nothing to say to Nurse Peacock, nor does she expect me to. She just walks away. She knows that I know that Rosie is dead. I don't think I have the courage to even challenge her. Nurse Peacock walks out of the room. Kenneth doesn't seem too perturbed. He hated Rosie anyway. Kenneth's fingers are stuck in a Chinese finger trap, and he's finding ways to escape. He brings his fingers together, apart, together, apart again. He starts talking about lawyers again. I pull out another piece of paper. I draw another triangle. At the top edge, I write Nurse Peacock. Under the bottom 2 edges, I write Kenneth and Jimmy. I frantically write, hate, 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 all over the page.
"What's that there?"
Kenneth asks. I screw the paper up, chuck it in my mouth, and swallow it. Kenneth's curiosity dies, and he goes back to his Chinese finger trap. I stare over at the doorway. 2 purple eyes hover around it. I see nothing else but the invading eyes of Nurse Peacock. The visions are accumulating and layering on top of one another. I can't fight my compulsion to eat, but I'm trying to eat as little as possible of the food served here. The day has been a continual replay of the cat's brain seeping out of its ear, the bees being devoured by a holocaustic army of scorpions, and Nurse Peacock's technicolored eyes. And, of course, Rosie's dead body. Mouth agape, finished off in that hospital bed. The images relay in my head and overlap in the loop. I take a shower that evening, and as I slipped off my hospital whites and hang 'em up, I noticed the hellfire red of my arm. The pockmarks are now bulbous blisters, and the tiger tattoo has been completely mutilated. An ugly whirl of black on orange is splattered across my arm. The bright strobe of those two eyes were shining green through the shower's glass door. Nurse Peacock is standing outside of the communal showers, peering at me from the hallway. I've planned my escape. I won't discharge from this place. I'm going to flee. They can keep their $10,000. I've seen enough. I'll sneak out in the middle of the night. I've already calculated where the fire doors are and that they can be pushed open. I saw Dr. Jurgen do it. He walked out onto the roof for a cigarette. On the roof, there's an emergency fire point with a ladder for the fire marshal access. From the roof, I can lower myself back onto the street and make my way home. I remember the ladder from the first day's fire safety training. I've made a point of not sleeping all night. I've stayed awake by drinking copious amounts of the free coffee and avoiding eating dinner. I had a couple of theatrical bites for the sake of Nurse Peacock. My empty stomach will ensure I stay up easily enough. If I sleep through the night and don't wake up, I'll miss my opportunity. If the heavy lucid dreams conquer me, I won't wake up at the perfect time and I'll have to stay here longer. I don't know how much the flashing eyes have seen or sensed already about my impending escape. I don't suspect I'd last another day here. I look at Kenneth, fast asleep. His eyes are so tightly closed, it looks like he's straining to keep them closed against an ecliptic sunrise. Almost like he's trying to stave off blindness. His fat gut pokes through his gown. His bed sheets and quilt are soaked through and cling against his body. He looks so much worse than the first day I saw him. We all do. I've decided to give him a chance to escape. I pull back Kenneth's sheets from over him. I feel the wet soak against my palm. He resists and pulls the sheets back towards him, but my grip is too strong on him. He's half asleep and straining to keep hold of this soggy quilt. I tell him I'm leaving. I plead with him to come with me. I warn him about this place, about the dreams, about the food, about Rosie. He kicks me away with his feet and pulls the sheet back over him. He'll probably think this is a dream in the morning. I don't care about Kenneth enough to argue or fight to save his life. I tried. I put my backpack on and changed out of the whites I had been condemned to for 3 weeks. Wearing jeans for the first time feels like a fresh release from the drabness of uniformity I had not been subjected to since secondary school. The jeans and t-shirt changed something within me. A freedom. A return to humanity. I'm out in the hallway and quietly walking towards the staircase. As I glide myself to within touching distance of the fire exit, I feel a gentle tug on my arm just as I'm going to push the emergency bar. It's Nurse Fillmore.
Shh, you'll set the fire alarms off,
she says. What are you doing? I ask.
I'm on night shift, and you're escaping,
she says. Escaping? I'm a volunteer.
You're escaping,
she says. I don't want to be in this loony bin anymore.
This fire door is alarmed. If you open it, you'll wake up the entire clinic.
Well, I'll just open it and go out of it anyway. Let the alarm sound.
And then you're in for it,
she says. I can't believe this. I'm 30 minutes from my fucking house, in a voluntary clinic, and you're telling me I can't leave?
It's not just you.
I want to leave.
Nobody leaves.
This isn't legal, I say.
This is the clinic. You don't just leave.
How do I get out of here?
You can escape, and I can help you.
She extends an arm out toward me. I'm following Nurse Fillmore down the staircase in the pitch black. She tells me that the best route of escape is through the basement. I try to ask her about this place, what she knows, why she's helping me, how it came to be, but she's frantic and too cautious of noise to better explain. She's pacing in a near sprint, and despite her 50 extra pounds, her additional age, and lack of mobility, I'm struggling to keep up. When I leave this place, I'm writing to every newspaper in the country. I'm finding out exactly what goes on at this clinic.
Down here,
she says, standing by a doorway. It's a caretaker's closet, or maybe a basement entrance. The door being older and more worn out, and of different coloring than every other door we passed. I've run through every staff-only sign in the clinic, and I'm down into parts I've never expected to witness. She stands before the basement door. This 50-something-year-old woman flaming with theatrics, really putting on a show of suspense for me. She puts her finger to her lips and throws the door open. Nurse Fillmore steps forward. I step behind her. I'm not where I should be. The domicile of my soul is strapped down on one side of the room, and I am on the other side. I'm watching, though. I see every detail. I've never seen so clearly before in all my life. I can see the viscera of my remains. I can see the flesh peeled off and thrown into chunks onto the floor. I see a cadaver placed strategically next to me, all different body parts mashed together on top. A poorly made casserole of meat and flesh. I see myself upright and strapped into a hospital stretcher. I can see the contents of my stomach dripping onto the hardwood floor, and a small tray laid out to collect the blood and doing a shit job of it. I can see the swarm of bees being devoured by the army of scorpions, and it is all taking place from within myself. I am housing the massacre once again. I see Rosie in the far corner. Her scrappy remains are piled on top of one another like a bag of bones. I see Kenneth. His brain is seeping out of his ear, and his skull is crushed and crinkled up, looking like a discarded crisp packet. I just barely made it out his fat mouth and beady eyes. I see the beige wood rotting on the walls surrounding us. The smell of damp mold in this dark and decaying basement. I see the nurses, all of them. There's Winslow, Fallon, Flynn, Fillmore, and Peacock, and about 18 others whose names I never got. I see Dr. Jurgen with his clipboard and pen. Nurse Peacock stands tallest. Her eyes are now glowing a shade of blood red, and she's walking towards me, but not the me that's all carved up in the corner being eaten by insects. She's approaching the me that's narrating this. The me that you're speaking to right now. Nurse Peacock confidently struts over in long catwalk strides. She raises her palm and extends her hand out towards me generously. She's waiting for me to accept that I can't accept, because I don't have palms or hands. They're on the cadaver, or they're strapped in with the rest of me. She smiles, and her eyes glow all the lovely shades of orange and red you would expect to see from an orange grove. The strobes have dimmed out now. She points to the mutilated and savaged remains that she's no doubt enjoyed slicing. She mouths the word $10,000 in mocking revulsion, and then she...
Whoever said that sleep is for the weak can go to hell. Sleep sharpens a person. It toughens you. After one night in this pit, my mind's a diamond. It started off like any other work night. I was in my office doing night work. When my clock struck 1, I checked my wristwatch, a Daniel Low. It told me it was 2:03 a.m. Amused, I turned my head to the framed engraving of Nebuchadnezzar hanging by my liquor. Before I know it, I'm standing there with an empty glass, admiring the doré woodcut as I grab a bottle. I refill my ice and whiskey as lightning flashes outside my windows. It's raining buckets. I count 5 fingers on my left hand. The last time I checked, I counted 8. A roll of thunder gently rocks the office. I lift my tumbler to my lips and count the ice cubes bobbing in it. I count them again, but then I hesitate. Something's not right, I realize. I hold the crystal to my eyes and inspect its details against the lamplight. Every groove and speck of gold appears precisely where they should be. Even my fingerprints are visible, and they never are. Not in this place. I stand transfixed in disbelief. How is this real? I know it isn't. That's when I remember the old engraving encased in glass in front of me. I lean close to the framed doré and search for my reflection on its shiny surface. To my relief, I search in vain. All I see is Nebuchadnezzar roasting his victims. My heartbeat slows. I reclaim my wits. I remind myself, it's just a dream. I clench my tumbler into a fist and punch the ancient king with all my strength, forcing glass and jagged crystal fragments deep into my skin. Beads of blood roll down the picture as whiskey licks my wounds like burning tongues. It hurts like the dickens, but I'm used to it. Every now and then I need to pinch myself to know I'm dreaming. After wrestling with the pain, I pull my hand back from the portrait. The engraving is undamaged, and my uninjured fingers are cradling an empty glass. I check my watch. It's 13:30, an hour which I know does not exist. Satisfied, I refill the tumbler and enjoy my drink, thinking life's a dream. And that's the way she found me. More specifically, that's when she chose to make her presence felt. Detective King. I glance at the King of Spades painted against my office door. The shapely silhouette of a woman stands behind its smoky glass. The door's unlocked, I tell her. In my mind, it always is. When solving cases in your sleep, I find it's best not to keep too many memories locked away. You can come in. The doorknob turns with a crack of thunder and seems to open on its own. I swear her hands never leave her side. Knowing what I do now, I don't think all the locks in Alcatraz would have kept her from me. She casts the shadow of an hourglass as she walks into my office. She is tall for a dame, a blonde, and dressed from hat to heels in black. Her lips are full, her skin like marble, and her thick hair styled in a classic fashion, late 19th century. She looks dressed to kill, in ways you'd never know unless she found you, or unless you found yourself, as I did, on the receiving end of her piercing stare. Her eyes, those steel blue eyes as deep as the ocean, as hard as ice. One look from them could have sent a chill down a dead man's spine, or at the very least raise his eyebrows. Good evening, ma'am. I shut the door behind us and inherit her coat and hat. No jewelry, I notice, nor makeup. You on your way to a funeral, or did you just come from one? She answers, neither. I pause and tilt my head at her, unsure if she's acting wise or if I need to wise up. In either case, that makes 2 of us. Please, have a seat. Her coat and hat have a familiar look and heft to them when I hang them. To my confusion, they're both bone dry, even though it's pouring rain, and she didn't arrive with an umbrella. I remind myself that this black skirt is just a passing shadow in my mind. She's in my dream, my brain, my temple. She is Athena, and I'm her Zeus. Would you like a splash of poison? I ask as I pour myself more whiskey. Poison doesn't work on me. I smirk. Sounds like you're speaking from experience. As expected, she does not respond, but not for the reason I intended. I look over my shoulder to see her seated with her back to me. I don't know if she's watching the rain outside my windows or... Realizing my error, I collect the folders strewn on my desk and return them to my file cabinet. 2 go into the top drawer, and 1 goes in the middle. Looking down, I give my bottom drawer a gentle kick. It remains as locked as Fort Knox. I return to my desk, adding, I'm sorry about the mess. As I sit down, to my surprise, the woman isn't looking out my windows, but at them. Specifically, at the one behind my head. I swivel around and read my name painted on it, along with the same playing card as on my door. Got something on your mind, Missy? Yes, if you don't mind me asking. I can't say I'll mind until I hear it, so ask away. Just keep the question short and complimentary. She returns my smile with a false one. Why did you settle on the King of Spades? For the agency? She nods. I understand the King, Detective King, but why did you choose the King of Spades? Well, because Spade and Archer were a pair of jokers. I offer the gal a cigarette, which she declines. Those things are deadly. Huh, I agree. I don't like jokers. I light myself a lucky strike. What about the King of Diamonds? I'm a detective, darling, not a jeweler. The King of Clubs. I shake my head. That symbol looks too much like a pawnbroker's from the sidewalk. Why not the King of Hearts? My God, I think. Lady, did you come here with a job or to play pinochle? That's not an answer to my question, she replies with moxie. I freeze in place, wondering what corner of my subconscious this gal crawled out of. I asked you why you did not wish to be identified by the King of Hearts. Does the card not suit you well, detective? 2 long, angry plumes of smoke shoot from my nostrils. The woman's got more backbone than a brontosaurus. Outside, I'm furious. Deep down, I'm terrified. At that moment, a gentle knock begins to rap against my eardrums. It's coming from somewhere inside the office. Thunder, I tell myself. It's only thunder. This time, a second, louder knocking jostles the bottom drawer of my file cabinet. My eyes shift to and from the files. Outside, the storm intensifies. Lightning flashes against my windows, projecting my name against the walls. But not the King of Spades beneath it. No. All I see is the King of Hearts. I shut my eyes and I down my whiskey. As the liquor goes to work, the pounding and flashing stops. I take a breath and regain my marbles. I'm sorry, lovely, but my time is limited. How limited? Increasingly. I close the window blinds behind me, obscuring the name and playing card the dame just played me with. So, if you don't mind me asking, dollface, who are you? And why are you here? The dame in black leans toward me, bathing her face in the shadow of my window blinds. I'm looking for information on an old case you worked. Which one? The Bauerdorf murder. I take a deep drag from my cigarette as I look the gal down and up. You a family member? Her pink lips purse, concealing her amusement. Not exactly. You a college friend, a former roommate? Lover? I ask. All 3? I had hoped to arouse some anger with my line of questioning. In my experience, it knocks people off their game and spills their beans, be it in a game of poker or in the dream world. I'm waiting for those dark blue diamonds in her eyes to flash like daggers. Instead, the dame just sits with her eyes downcast, unaffected, like she was waiting for a bus to hit me. I narrow my eyelids into snake slits. There's something familiar about this damsel, and whatever it is, she's hiding it from me. My mind is boiling. Well, I hate to break it to you, dollface, but your time would be better spent searching in a library. I never took that case. That was West Hollywood, and the LAPD doesn't work that beat. The case never came to you? I shake my head and stab my cigarette into an ashtray. You got me wrong. As I said, the LAPD works LA. The West Hollywood Bulls patrol West Hollywood. I was with the LAPD during the dame locks eyes with me, catching me off guard. God damn, she's good, I think. Where was I? The LAPD? Yes, I clear my throat. West Hollywood was outside our jurisdiction. Therefore, the Bauerdorf murder never came to me. Not even accidentally. Her steely eyes probe mine like ice picks, sending a deep chill down my neck. I lower my head to hide my face, incensed over how well she's using my own mind games against me. What you're looking for is in a book somewhere. This book? I snap my head to see the vixen standing alongside my file cabinet. Its top drawer is open, and she's reading a small hardcover in the lamplight. Get away from there! I leap from my desk straight to the cabinet and slam it shut. Unfortunately, this causes the middle drawer to pop open, revealing several pages covered with redactions. As I wrestle to control the cabinet, I wedge my foot against the floor to prevent any chance of the bottom drawer busting open. What is this? The lady asks, her eyes burrowed in the book. That's nothing. I reach for the text, but she keeps it from me. That book's top drawer stuff, old memories, it's nothing dangerous. Then why is there blood on it? I hear dripping, and it isn't rain. She hands the book back to me and my mind's eye zooms in on the dark memento. I see the book laid atop a desktop, just as I found it at Los Angeles Public Library. It's October 1944. I'm wearing my old LAPD uniform, and I'm interviewing 2 librarians about the grim discovery they made that morning. I saw it, officer. There was blood on its pages, I swear. Did you see who returned it, ma'am? No. It must have been here all evening. But the last person who checked it out was... Ma'am? I'm sorry, officer. It's just... The book had been checked out by the woman murdered in Hollywood last week, officer. Thank you, ma'am. Detective King? I look away from the blood-stained book and the dame in black. With my mind made up, I wander back to Nebuchadnezzar and pour myself more liquid courage. 8 years ago, some crackpot returned a book to the public library smeared with blood. The book was on loan to Georgette Bauerdorf, deceased. So I collected it as evidence and delivered it to the detectives at West Hollywood. Did you read the book? Only the parts with blood on them. This section? The dame in black hands me a wad of typed-up pages. As I reach for them, our fingers touch. Her skin's as smooth as melting ice. I remove a paperclip from the pages and accidentally slice my finger. The cut hurts so much. The pain is blinding. I drop the pages and my mind flashes with the white of wood pulp. I see myself, still in uniform, typing at LAPD Central Station. As my fingers tap dance atop my Remington, I turn my head to and from the blood-stained pages on my desk. A Study of Dreams by Friedrich von Eden. Letter by letter, I preserve the memory. Since 1896, I have studied my own dreams, writing down the most interesting in my diary. In 1898, I began to keep a separate account for a particular kind of dream, which seemed to me the most important, and I have continued it up to this day. Altogether, I collected about 500 dreams, of which 352 were the particular kind just mentioned. This material may form the basis of what I hope may become a scientific structure of some value. I pause to read the essay, but I'm no longer at the headquarters. I'm in my apartment on that same evening, about to attempt what Friedrich von Eeden dubbed lucid dreaming. In these lucid dreams, the reintegration of the psychic functions is so complete that the sleeper remembers day life and his own condition, reaches a state of perfect awareness, and is able to direct his attention and to attempt different acts of free volition. Perfect awareness. There's no better way to describe it. I remember it as clear as crystal. I remember my first lucid dream. I see myself staring at my hands in disbelief, realizing the godlike powers that are my fingertips. I see myself performing fantastic feats, flying, surviving gunshots, and even conversing with fallen friends. And then I take the big jump. I see myself exploring the deepest depths of my mind and memory. In a single plunge, I see my subconscious. I relive it all, my entire memory, the entire world, my entire life. I also witness the crime that got me here. Through my mind's eye, I see the Bauerdorf murder as it played out. I reconstruct the evening precisely as my subconscious knows it. It's October 12th, 1944, just after midnight. Georgette Bauerdorf, brunette, age 20, returns to her apartment after a busy night at the Hollywood Canteen. A man is waiting for her, one of many draftees she's met there. He's one of the hundreds of men she works with, dances with, and occasionally sleeps with. He's been there before. He knows the location. He unscrews the light bulb outside her door, leaving a fingerprint. He's also a patient predator. He stalks. He lingers. And as he waits, he reads a book Georgette has open, some bedside reading on lucid dreaming. I read the last words printed on the page before Georgette's blood stains them. We are here, however, on the borders of a realm of mystery where we have to advance very carefully. To deny may be just as dangerous and misleading as to accept. I don't deny the warning. I accept it. I recognize my responsibility as a law enforcer, and I search for answers in the realm of mystery. I gasp for air. Did you see that? I ask the dame in black beside me. She shakes her head. I don't have much experience at dreaming. Why not? She sighs. I never sleep. My eyes widen. You don't? Why? Too much work, she tells me flatly. Curious what work is like within the dream world, I ask. What do you do? She turns her back on me and changes the subject. I understand that you dream differently. How do you control them? I approach her with a smirk of confidence. You use your head. I snap my fingers in front of her and then present her with the most beautiful rose one can imagine. She accepts it speechlessly. Anyone can lucid dream by spotting telltales that they're asleep. Once you find them, the secret to not waking up is simply not to mind them. I guess my line of work prepared me well for that. When you're a cop, you're always on the lookout for something suspicious. When you're dreaming, something suspicious tends to delve into the fantastic. It could be an extra finger, a change in scenery, a lack of reflection. Anything you know could only happen in a dream. Once you find them, you work with them. Eventually, you learn how to build with them. I guide her gaze to the windows, presenting the entire world of my creation. The woman runs her eyes over the rainy cityscape. This is all you're doing. I smile, every inch of it, including you, my lovely. I hate to break it to you, but only one of us is alive. It's like through the looking glass. You're Alice, and I'm the Red King, fast asleep. You're just a girl in my dream this evening. Fortunately, it's a good dream. I shoot my dream girl a wink. She smiles softly and leans against me as we watch the storm. I put my arm around her and run my fingers through her hair. Briefly, one of my fingers grazes her cheek. I flinch. Her flesh is icy to the touch. The woman sees the surprise on my face and pushes herself away from me before I can apologize. "Tell me more about the murder," she says, her back to me. Irritated with myself over my error, I lean against my file cabinet. "I'm sorry, but I can't. There's only so much I can tell you without this place going haywire. It could get messy." "You said you could control this world." "I can, but I can also lose control of it. Even I have nightmares sometimes, and when you're a lucid dreamer, experiencing a lucid nightmare could do a number on you. I could go crazy." "You won't," she insists. The dame folds her arms and straightens her posture. "I'll be here." I choke on my own throat, unable to contain my laughter. "Sweetheart. Oh, it doesn't work that way." The woman's diamond eyes begin to water. To my shock, a single teardrop drips down her face. "You won't protect me?" "Hey." I dab her tears with a handkerchief. "There's no reason for that, dollface. It's not that I don't like you or don't trust you. I just don't want you to see the worst this place has to offer." "What are you afraid of?" I exhale, exhausted from avoiding the obvious. "Here," I say. I loop my arm around my lady's and lead her to my file cabinet. "As I said, you can build entire worlds in here. The Romans called them memory palaces, but I like to keep things simple. I like the office I'm asleep in. The only difference is this number." I rap my knuckles against the file cabinet. "All my memories are in here. Unfortunately, memories tend to come in 3 flavors: good, bad, and nightmarish. I've done a lot of things that I'm not proud of. While those are memories I'm prepared to live with, I don't want them setting up shop in here. It's too dangerous, too traumatizing. This file cabinet is the only thing keeping the worst from taking over. It's where I cage my demons." The dame looks up at me, worry in her eyes. "Detective King," she gasps, still clutching my handkerchief. "What have you done?" I lead her back to my armchair so that I can break it to her gently. Once she's seated, I light myself another cigarette and lean against my desk. "When I delivered that book to West Hollywood, the sheriff's department couldn't make heads or tails of it. They were dumb as donuts. All they knew was that Miss Bauerdorf spent most of her nights with men in uniform. Georgette was just a child. She was only 20 years old, an angel. And she was brutally raped and murdered by someone who most likely was enlisted. We were in the middle of a war. I didn't want to see her killer get off easy, not with dimwits like D.A. Hauser granting leniency to soldiers right and left. I had to do something." "Why you? Who gave you that right?" That stung me. "The American people gave me that right. I took an oath, Princess. It was my duty. I swore to defend the Constitution from all enemies, foreign and domestic. Because of some harebrained law involving maps, Miss Bauerdorf's killer stood no chance of facing justice. The LAPD should have been allowed to take that case. We would have found that angel's killer, and we would have sent him straight to hell. The system failed to protect Miss Bauerdorf. So, I had to act. Alone. In the name of justice." The dame begins to crush my handkerchief into a fist. "And what, if I may ask, is your idea of justice?" At this point, my ashtray is up to its ass in butts. I collected all the evidence I could find on the Bauerdorf murder. I spent night after night examining them at that desk, and unlike the detectives at West Hollywood, I found the man who murdered Georgette Bauerdorf. He was a draftee, en route to San Francisco for deployment in the Pacific. I got him dead to rights by comparing fingerprints found at the scene with records the Navy had on file. He covered his tracks, both at the scene and when he returned that library book. It was all a ruse, to dupe the dullards of West Hollywood into thinking the Bauerdorf killer was still in the city. And it worked in spades. He had probably killed before, and I have no doubt that he would have killed again. That's why I gave him a choice once I confronted him in San Francisco. If he didn't kill himself right then and there, I'd do it myself. And I didn't plan to make it quick and painless. A dark shadow spreads across the damsel's face. You were an officer of the law and you convinced this man to kill himself. I nod. That's right. And I'd do it again if I had to. You did do it again, she said, seething, and many more times after that. My eyes widen. Jesus Christ, lady. How much about me do you know already? She snaps her head in anger toward my file cabinet's bottom drawer. Horrified, I rush over to make sure its lock is still intact. Relieved, I turn my head back to the dame. My hair's a mess, and my heart is pounding. How much did you see in there? She rises. I can assure you that I have never opened that drawer. Don't lie to me, Cupcake. You've been stringing me along this entire evening. I know you're hiding something from me, but for now, I want some answers. Did you see the contents of this drawer? Tell me the truth! The woman doesn't raise her volume or resort to threats. She just stares straight at me and says, without a flinch, I never lie. I swallow. Convinced, I pour myself another drink and lay down on my sofa. A night like this, I muse while staring at the ceiling. I sometimes think my mind is on a downward spiral. The dame in black sits next to me, her chair beside my head. What do you see that spiral leading to? My eyes stare aimlessly at the ceiling fan as I say, suicide. A long, unbroken silence is shared between us. It's just so exhausting. I continue, trying to keep all those demons buried. How many are there? I clench my jaw as I say the number. 21. You killed 21 men. I closed 21 unsolved cases. The Black Dahlia, Bugsy Siegel. I found every one of their killers. Each one of them escaped the system, but I caught them. Did you kill them all? This ruffles my feathers. Not all of them, just the ones who weren't open to my persuasion. Did you always give them the choice of death or suicide? I nod from my sofa pillow. I convinced them to kill themselves so that the boys in the clubhouse would quickly close their investigation. It was my best defense. Did any officers know what you were doing? No, but what? I turn my head and look at the dream girl next to me. By God, she's beautiful. Would you check that drawer for me? She looks off and back. They're fine. I put another cigarette in my mouth and the dame lights it for me. Thanks, sweetheart. Continue. I puff away. Once I made detective, one too many criminals I arrested committed suicide immediately before their trial. I knew they would have gotten off for lack of evidence. I had no choice. It was the only way to keep them off the streets. I was never indicted for what I'd done, but with internal affairs swimming around like sharks, I had to get out of there. I took my tin and heater and off I went to the private sector. They had a nickname for you during this time, didn't they? I nod in sad acceptance. Yeah. Suicide King. "The King of Hearts," she says. "You have quite a talent for suicide, don't you?" "I wouldn't call it a talent." "What is it then? Experience?" Lightning flashes, blinding me as my ears fill with the sound of glass shattering. I see a small house with a broken window, a young boy crying, and a mother trying to console him. "It's not your fault," she says, but the kid won't have it. "Why did he die?" "These things happen, my love." "No! We killed him!" "No, we didn't. That poor bird killed itself." "Why?" Because God told him to." In a rapid montage of flashes, I see a dead bird on the ground, the dame pulling a bloodied window pane from my file cabinet, and a Rorschach ink blot framed on the wall in front of me. No matter how many times I stare at this, it always looks to me like a bird flying into glass. It was my first glimpse of death, of suicide. I could never shake the image from my head. The dame in black stands beside me, hanging off my arm. "Do you want to tell me about your mother?" I shake my head. That'd be opening a Pandora's box. "There must be something you can tell me." I close my eyes and turn away from the Rorschach. "She died a few years ago in a nursing home. I never visited her." I pause. "I should have." The sound of rain fills in the silence, and the dame leans her head against my shoulder. "Can I ask you one last question?" I look down at her and smile softly. "For you, doll? Anything." The woman moves closer to me. "If your mother were still alive, do you think she would forgive you?" No. I don't think so." "Why?" "Why would she? I stuck her in a dead-end nursing home to die alone." The dame goes silent. I don't know if she's thinking or if she's waiting. Finally, she says, "If she loved you, she might forgive you." Grateful, I take my dream girl by her hand. To my surprise, it's warm. I throw my arms around her and hold her tightly. I don't know who she is or where she came from, but something about her is irreplaceable. She's my dream girl, and I don't want to break our hearts by waking up. I pet her hair and ask, "What's your name?" The raindrops on my windows roll down her face like tears. Her eyes are downcast. "You wouldn't like it." "Please, doll. I want to hear it." She looks at me and I at her. My lady in black closes her ice blue eyes and parts her lips. The entire world around us holds its breath. I want to kiss her, but before I do, "What's your name?" I beg her. "Tell me." With cold breath and quiet lips, she whispers, "Death." My subconscious realizes before I do. The office shakes as if a bomb exploded. I throw the girl away from me and back away in horror. My God. I am so sorry. A flash of lightning reveals her visage. Beneath her hair and beauty, I see the hooded, skinless, lifeless skull of death. "What the hell are you doing here?" I gasp. "I had no choice," she sobs. "You made me do this." "I did?" Tears come pouring down her face. "How could you?" A boom of thunder rocks the building. The lights go out, and my lady vanishes. Horrified, I take out my lighter and flick it on. As I creak through the darkened office, I hear a pounding at my door. I turn around with my gun primed and pointed. "Who's there?" I holler. I walk up to the door and crack it open. After peeking out, I see a hideous image from my past, face to face. It's a familiar face, a bloodied face. The face of Georgette Bauerdorf's killer after I watched him hang himself. I slam my door and lock it as the killer throws himself against its window. As I unload my pistol through its smoky glass, blood splatters the King of Hearts painted on it. I back away from the door and topple a bookcase as a barricade. To my disgust, each of its shelves contains copies of the same blood-covered book. I jump backward, bumping into the coat and hat the dame in black had brought in earlier. They're still hanging from my coat rack, but for some reason the garments now have tags from a pawnbroker. I try to wish away the calamity around me. I try to control my dream. I throw my arms out and cry, "Enough!" It doesn't work. All my years of lucid dreaming fail to save me. I feel paralyzed and powerless. And worst of all, no matter how hard I try, I can't escape. I can't wake up. Lightning flashes and I see a face in front of me. I fire my gun and hear glass shattering. I inspect the damage and then stagger backward. The figure was my reflection in my framed engraving of Nebuchadnezzar. I spin around at a tizzy, firing my pistol in every direction. "I know you're here!" I shout, panicking. "Show yourself! I want you out of my head!" A light clicks on in front of me. It's the lamp atop my file cabinet. I walk toward it with my gun still smoking. My eyes widen with shock. The padlock on my bottom drawer has been shot off. Realizing the nightmare I unleashed, I snap my head back toward my door. A wave of 20 suicides breaks against it. Their faces and blood-stained figures press against my window, desperate to butt and claw their way inside. I leap over my desk and tear down my blinds, prepared to jump through my window. As expected, the King of Hearts covers the glass in front of me. I fire my gun straight at the image, but the window doesn't shatter. Instead, water pours in through the holes I made. Baffled, I peer out the window at the city, and the sight leaves me speechless. As far as I can see, the entire city of Los Angeles, my office included, is underwater. I back away from the windows and bump into the dame in black. "What's going on?" I stammer. "Who's doing this?" "You are," she says without a flinch. "This is the world you created your entire life." "How the hell am I responsible for this?" I demand at gunpoint. Before she answers, a deep, metallic rumble courses through my office. I look outside and see something that even I would not have dreamed. "My God," I gasp. A warship the size of a Chrysler building plunges beneath the waves atop the city. The ship comes crashing down just outside my office, shaking everything. Water comes pouring in through my fractured windows. I'm scared to death, but not as frightened as the sailors I see outside. The doomed men pound their palms against my windows in a desperate attempt to get inside. I back away and shake my head at them, knowing that they are doomed. That's when I start seeing shark fins. One of the sailors, just a teenager, erupts with blood as a tiger shark attacks him from behind. Another shark descends on him, disemboweling him. I watch in horror as the poor young lad is ripped in two. The attack turns into a feeding frenzy as hundreds of sailors are torn apart before my eyes. "The man you murdered in San Francisco," the woman in black says to me, "was a sailor on a warship called the USS Indianapolis. The ship was sunk by the Japanese 4 months later, taking 300 lives with it. while condemning another 900 to the open sea for days. Only 317 men survived after watching hundreds of their comrades starve or drown. Others chose suicide, Detective King. The rest were attacked by sharks and eaten alive. Some of them were just boys, Detective. And such was the death you sent them to. That was your handiwork, I barked to her. Not mine. I am not like you. I am not death. No, but you pretend you are. It is not your place to whisper suicide into an unsuspecting ear. That is my role, Detective King. My responsibility. My curse. Yeah? Just as it was your job to kill Georgette Bauerdorf? I sneer. No, she says with angry eyes. She was taken before her time, as was her killer. I shake my head at her. I will not apologize to you for the lives I took. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to them. The woman outstretches her arms and points to the sea of blood outside my window. If you had taken Georgette Bauerdorf's killer to justice, none of these young men would have died in vain. The Indianapolis would have stayed ashore while its crew and officers testified at the killer's trial. The ship would have never met its awful fate. You cost all these men their future, their hopes, their lives. Look upon your work, King of Suicide and Despair. Speechlessly, I take it in. Nearly 1,000 men dead in the water, all floating food to manic sharks. It is a crimson masterpiece of death, and I am its composer. For a moment, I feel what it is like to be the figure standing next to me. For a single, chilling instant. I am death. Finally, it is too much. I hang my head and turn away, prepared to face the demon sent to claim me. If there's any more suffering I must atone for, please make it quick. The woman turns her head and guides my eyes to my file cabinet. Its bottom drawer is ajar. Obediently, mindlessly, and all but hopelessly, I open it. Within the bottom drawer are my deepest shames and fears, my worst memories and atrocities, the most disgraceful excuses for my existence. I look into the cabinet and find a blood-stained folder. As I pick it up, a single faded photograph slides out of it. It falls face down onto the floor, and I bend down to pick it up. I take one look at the picture and then collapse onto my knees. The photograph was one of many I inherited from my late mother. It is old, a relic from the late 19th century, just like the hairstyle of the woman in it. My mother, as a young lady. I drop the picture. The woman in black behind me is wearing my mother's face. White-hot tears pour down my cheeks. Why did you do this? I ask. Why her? Why my mother? Because she was the last life you claimed, Detective King. She did not die from age or illness. She killed herself the day she realized that you, her son, had cast her there to disappear. She died alone and forgotten. You condemned her to her fate. With those words, I bury my face into my hands. As I sob, my wall clock chimes. My windows shatter. My whole office begins to flood. If I do nothing, I will drown. If I dive through my windows, the sharks will kill me. If I go out my door, I will have to fight my way through the fists and teeth of every criminal I condemn to suicide. My pupils focus. Determined to defy the world, I push myself up from the ground and point my pistol at the woman. I feel the killer instinct in me fighting for survival, but for all my strength and desperation, I cannot pull the trigger. After all I've sinned, I cannot bring myself to murder my own mother. Behind the woman, the suicides outside my door attack my barrier. Chunks of bloodied flesh float throughout my flooded office. As I run my eyes over the nightmare, I ask the shade, "Is this all a dream?" The woman shakes her head in uncertainty. As I said, I don't have much experience at dreaming. Frustrated, I bite my lip so hard it's bleeding. At that moment, the Rorschach framed on my wall shatters. A dead bird comes crashing through the frame and lands at my feet with a wet thud. I stare at the bird, its broken body twisted in grotesque angles, just as I remembered it. In my experience, I tell the dame, there's always one surefire way to check out of this hotel. My eyes fall to my pistol, as do hers. Are you sure you want to do this? Unsure, I check my wristwatch. The goddamn dial's broken. No, but you forced my hand. I stand tall and face the lady with my pistol held to my temple. My finger twitches, about to pull the trigger. My dream girl shakes her head. Don't do it, she begs. Please, if you love me, don't kill yourself. I'm sorry, sweetheart. It's been a dream come true to share this evening with you, but we're at the end of our road. It's time for me to shuffle off. See what else is out there. I take a final breath and cross myself. Farewell, lovely. With death's work done, she accepts my resignation with a kiss. Rest in peace, she whispers. I pull the trigger. My debt is paid.
Shorty Small, a man neither short nor small, entered the coffee shop, surveyed the patrons, and found who he sought. Homer LaCroix sat in a corner table munching on a beignet with a mug of coffee in his right hand. When he approached the table, he growled, "What's so damn important? You dragged me down here at 7 in the morning." Raising the sweet pastry, Homer said, "Have you tried one of their beignets?" "I just moved here. I didn't know the place existed. And what the hell is a beignet? You haven't experienced New Orleans until you tried one of these. Sit, I'll order you one." LaCroix searched the room and caught the eye of one of the cafe's waitresses. He pointed to his coffee and held up his pastry. He then nodded at Small. "Shouldn't be too long. I told her you'd be joining me." "Homer, you're in New Orleans now, Shorty. You've got to learn to relax. How was the move?" "Wonderful. If you enjoy realizing all your worldly possessions fit into the back of an SUV. Where are you staying?" "At the moment, Claire's." LaCroix tilted his head. "At the moment?" "That's what I said." The waitress set a mug of coffee and the beignet in front of Small and walked away without saying a word. Small took a bite and raised his eyebrows. LaCroix smiled. Good, aren't they? First thing you've been right about this morning, so why the early meeting? Fishing a folded piece of paper out of his jacket pocket, LaCroix laid it in front of the big man. Ever see anything like this? Taking the page, Small studied it as he wiped powdered sugar off his lips with a napkin. It's a walking stick, so? What else do you see? It's an ornately carved cane with a handle resembling a cobra about to strike. Get to the point, Homer. The tall, lanky man withdrew another picture from his jacket pocket. Recognize this guy? Small nodded. Who wouldn't? He's an action movie star. I've seen most of his films, although nothing lately. Well, he won't be making any more. Raising his head from studying the photo, Small appraised LaCroix. What's that supposed to mean? He's dead. He's probably old, too. Mid-60s. Healthy and negotiating a new movie. He died of a snake bite. King Cobra venom, according to the autopsy. Small rolled his eyes. Homer, there aren't any wild king cobras in Louisiana, or the United States for that matter. They're native to India. I'm aware of that. Studying the picture of the walking stick again and then the picture of the actor, Small shook his head slowly. Please don't tell me the cane did it. LaCroix shrugged. It's New Orleans. That's not an answer. What do the police say? They're washing their hands of it. The detective I spoke to said it probably got loose from its owner, whoever that might be. The cops aren't concerned? No. Where'd the actor get the walking stick? That's what the tourism board wants you to find out. Thought they were going to pay for my move here. A slightly over 1 inch thick envelope appeared on the table. LaCroix scooted it across the surface toward Small. 30,000, 10 for your move, and 20 as a retaining fee. The envelope disappeared under the table. Where's the cane? Never found. Small's mouth twitched. Then how did they know he owned one? Receipt found in his apartment. Did someone let a snake loose in his place in order to steal the walking stick? LaCroix shrugged. That's what you're supposed to determine. With a slight shake of his head, Small stood. For $20,000, I'll look into it. He turned to walk out of the cafe but stopped. The pastry was good, thanks. Claire Honoré stood behind the cash wrap and smiled as Shorty Small walked through the front door of her newly remodeled jewelry, gemstones, and minerals shop located in the French Quarter. Hi, what did Homer want? After kissing her, he showed her the picture of the cane. Ever see one of these before? Her eyes widened as she took in the photo. What's wrong, Claire? Tell me you didn't buy one. I didn't. What's the matter? They're from India and are believed to be cursed. They? How many of these are there? Too many. That didn't answer my question. What do you know about these things? Claire grew quiet for a few moments. She pursed her lips. Let's close the shop and get some coffee next door. It's complicated. With a mug of coffee cradled in her hand and sitting in a far corner of the small cafe, Claire looked at Small and sighed. It all started with a man named David Allen. He was born in 1925 and learned to whittle as a young boy. After a heart attack in the 1960s, he got serious about changing his hobby into something more lucrative. He gave away his early canes to local people who couldn't afford to buy one. Then he started selling them. He was a kind-hearted, good man. Then in 1981, he and his wife went to Washington, D.C. to participate in the Festival of American Folklife sponsored by the Smithsonian. During his visit to the festival, a man named Edgar Lort became fascinated at the walking sticks produced by David. Lort returned to New Orleans and set up a shop specializing in hand-carved walking sticks. He bought many from David Allen, but most of the ones occupying his shop came from all over the world. After taking a sip of coffee, Small said, Let me guess, he imported a bunch of canes from India. Claire nodded. I was joking. She gave him a grim smile. I'm not. In fact, he brought in 8 canes, all of similar design. One of those walking sticks was the one in the picture you showed me. From where? Somewhere in India. He never would tell me the exact location. I need to talk to this Lort character. That will be difficult. Small smiled. Why? He died by snakebite just before New Year's Day in 2015. The cobra canes were discovered locked in a gun safe. How do you know so much about them? A shrug became his answer. Claire? I met Edgar at a Chamber of Commerce function when I first took over the shop. He told me all about his searches for the oddest and more unique walking sticks. He was a strange fellow and just as odd-looking. Your friend Homer LaCroix reminds me a lot of him. Yeah, Homer is a strange-looking dude. What happened to Lort's store? To my knowledge, he was heavy in debt. His bank took possession of the shop after he died and liquidated the inventory. To who? No one knows. It was done in secret. One day all of his inventory was in the shop. The next day, the building was empty with a for lease sign on it. Huh. Shorty, please don't get mixed up with this. There is some serious evil surrounding those cobra walking sticks. Claire, you know I don't believe in all that crap. What about my grandmother, the witch? Small shrugged. Can't explain it, but I'm sure there's a logical explanation. Yes, there is. She was a witch. After giving her a half grin, he continued. Who would know more about the inventory? I suspect the bank. Which one? Bank of Louisiana. The one on St. Charles? She nodded. I'll check with them today. Claire continued to stare at the coffee in her mug. Don't worry, Claire. Nothing's going to happen. She snapped her head up and glared at Small. You don't know that. You're getting involved with something that should be left alone. And for what? Your curiosity? No, for $20,000. The glare softened. Just be careful. Always. Bank of Louisiana Vice President Justin Woodward gestured to the seat in front of his desk. Please have a seat, Mr. Small. What can I do for you today? I'm looking into a matter for the tourism board. Ah, then how can I help you? Small pulled the picture of the cobra walking stick out of his jacket pocket and laid it in front of the banker. Supposedly, there might have been as many as 8 canes like this one in Lort's inventory the night the bank seized his store after his death. The tourism board would like to know where they went. Placing half readers on his nose, Woodward picked up the picture and studied the cane. I remember them. I was just starting with the bank back then, and one of my first assignments was taking inventory of his shop. Do you remember what happened to them? Let me think. He kept the picture in his hand as he grew silent. After a minute, he laid it down on the desktop and started typing on his computer keyboard. He then studied the screen. It seems we consigned the entire lot of inventory to an auction house in Dallas. He stared at the screen for a few more moments, frowned, and started typing again. Removing his glasses, he returned his attention to Small. There is no record of the cobra walking sticks being transferred to the auction house. Which means? It means if I hadn't remembered them, this would never have been discovered. They may have been stolen. Does the bank have records of them being inventoried the night of the seizure? Woodward started typing on his keyboard again. He then ran his fingers down the screen as if checking a list. His finger stopped halfway down and he frowned. Oh dear. Did you find them? Yes, they were checked in, but did not make it to the auction house. What happened in between is the question. That was over a decade ago, isn't it, Mr. Woodward? Yes, we may never know what happened. Small raised an eyebrow. Was the inventory appraised prior to being sent to the auction house? If it was, I wasn't told. Is this the first time a discrepancy has been discovered? As far as I know, it is. I was transferred out of that department before the auction house took possession of the inventory. Can you recall who might have had access back then? No, sorry. Standing, Small offered his hand. Thank you for your time. Woodward mindlessly shook it, but kept his attention on his computer screen. Parked behind the bank where Small figured the bank employees kept their cars, he waited. At precisely 4:35 p.m., Justin Woodward exited the back door of the bank. With a hurried pace and eyes glued to a new BMW X5, the man unlocked the door and slipped into the driver's seat. A minute later, Small observed the backlights flare, the luxury SUV backed out of its parking space and screeched out of the lot. Following the bank executive through the heavy afternoon traffic in New Orleans did not impose a problem for Small. Having followed numerous marks over the years allowed him to perfect his technique. The bank vice president did not hurry but seemed to hesitate at one corner. Just as the light turned to yellow, he sped through the intersection. Small did not panic. As soon as the light changed in his favor again, he increased his speed until he saw the BMW 5 cars ahead stopped at another light. With a slight smile, he settled in and continued to follow Woodward. After 40 minutes of negotiating the streets of the Big Easy, the BMW emerged onto West Interstate 10. Small kept back as the two vehicles traveled west out of the city. An hour and a half later, the BMW pulled into the parking lot of a warehouse on the outskirts of Baton Rouge. Driving past, he noted the name and pulled over a half-mile further on. Using his cell phone, he entered a Google search of the place. The results came back as a private warehouse owned by an LLC. An additional search of the Louisiana Secretary of State's office told Shorty Small the warehouse served as the headquarters for an organization dedicated to the preservation of Louisiana culture. With a smile growing the more he read, he put his Ford Escape in gear and headed back to New Orleans. The next day, after spending the morning chasing business names, aliases, and doing business as statements, Shorty Small knew more about the financial holdings of Bank of Louisiana Vice President Justin Woodward. While all of the entities he identified appeared legitimate, the former hitman smelled blood in the water, so to speak. Something was off. His next step would be to find out more about the walking sticks. At 4 p.m., a graduate student at Tulane University escorted Small to the office of Carmen Fowler, Ph.D. After introductions, the graduate student left and Dr. Fowler smiled. "What can I help you with, Mr. Small?" "For starters, call me Shorty." "Very well. Do you have a question about anthropology?" Removing the picture of the cobra walking stick, he laid it on top of the conference table where they sat. She raised an eyebrow as she picked up the photo. "Are you in possession of this artifact, Shorty?" "No, I've been asked to look into its importance." "I see." She studied the picture for a few moments, stood, and went to a bookshelf next to her desk. She bent over and removed a book from the shelf. Flipping through it, she then returned to the table. Placing the book so Small could see the page, she tapped on a picture. "If I'm not mistaken, it's the same object." With a nod, Small looked at the professor and then lifted the cover of the book. The author was Carmen Fowler. Apparently, I am speaking to someone who knows what they're talking about." She leaned back and folded her arms. "Who's asking you to look into its importance?" "I'm an investigator for the tourism board." "Ah." With a smile, she reached for the book and flipped to another page. "In the beginning, there were 10 of them. Not identical, but similar in design. They were all handmade in northeastern India during World War II in a secluded village called Mayong. According to legend, when the Japanese tried to invade India, they sent an expeditionary force as far as the Brahmaputra River where the village is located. Not long afterwards, Japan withdrew and concentrated more on their Burma campaign. 8 canes are said to have survived the encounter with the Japanese." "Is there a connection with the Japanese withdrawing and the canes?" "Legend tells us 2 of the walking sticks were given as gifts to the Japanese generals. Both died under mysterious circumstances." "Let me guess, snake bites." The professor's smile disappeared. "Yes, and those 2 walking sticks were never found." "Do you believe these objects are cursed, Professor Fowler?" Her gaze went from her visitor's face to the picture in her book and then back at the retired hitman. There are a lot of mysterious events over the course of human history, many of which are hard to explain, Shorty. The city of Mayong is nicknamed the Land of Black Magic. Whether that is true is hard to determine, but once the Japanese encountered the people of the city, they quickly withdrew from India and concentrated their efforts elsewhere. Those facts alone could lead one to speculate. Speculate what, Professor?
While the Japanese had difficulties with supply lines stretching into India during World War II, the Cobra walking sticks may have been one of the reasons for the Japanese finally abandoning their goals in India.
The next morning, Shorty Small fell into step with Justin Woodward as he walked through the bank's parking lot. Glancing at his walking companion, the banker said,
"I'm extremely busy today, Mr. Small."
"That's okay. I just thought you'd appreciate an update on what the tourism board discussed last night at their meeting."
"Why would I care?"
"Your name came up several times."
Woodward stopped and turned toward Small. "Why would my name come up?"
"They might be under the impression you are the owner of a warehouse in Baton Rouge that supplied a particularly rare walking stick to a high-end men's wear boutique. The shop then sold it to a well-known actor. The actor died under mysterious circumstances."
The banker's eyes widened suddenly and then he frowned. "Even if I knew what you were talking about, I don't see how it would involve me."
"It normally wouldn't, but you see, the walking stick was one of 7 canes seized by your bank that disappeared before they could be sent to an auction house in Dallas."
"Are you accusing me of stealing them, Mr. Small?"
"No, I'm just an investigator. I report to the tourism board."
Woodward stared at Small for several moments. "I'm late. If you have something else to say, make an appointment. I'll be reporting to work now."
As the banker turned and hurried toward the building's rear entrance, Small said, "Don't be surprised if the tourism board spoke to the bank's president early this morning."
This statement only made the man walk faster.
The time approached 10 a.m. After getting a cup of coffee and waiting in his vehicle in the back of the parking lot, Small watched as Justin Woodward exited the bank, a white box in his arms and a scowl on his face. A bank security guard followed 5 paces behind. Once they were several yards past the entrance, the guard stopped following and watched the ex-vice president unlock his BMW. He immediately returned to the bank's interior. Starting the engine of his Ford, Small waited for the luxury SUV to pull out of the parking lot before he followed. Keeping track of Woodward did not create too many challenges for Small. The ex-banker stopped at a liquor store several blocks from his apartment. He spent less than 2 minutes in the store before coming out with a brown paper bag containing his purchase. The shape reminded Small of some of his own purchases in liquor stores over the years. When Woodward parked his BMW in the apartment's parking lot, he hurried to his door on the first floor. Small glanced at his wristwatch, smiled, and settled back to wait. At 12:23 p.m., a Domino's pizza delivery car parked in an empty slot next to the BMW. The driver pulled an insulated bag out of the back seat and hurried toward the apartment. Small exited his vehicle and rushed toward the now open apartment door. He approached the space from the side, and just before Woodward could shut it, Small pushed the entry open, shoving the banker backward. He stumbled and the pizza flew from his hands. It skidded across the living room floor, leaving cheese, pepperoni, and sauce smeared on the carpet. Woodward slurred his words.
"What the hell are you doing here? Get out!"
Small withdrew his Glock 19 from his waistband, pointed it at Woodward, and growled, "Shut up." The prone man stared up at the larger man, his eyes bulging.
What do you want?"
"Where are the walking sticks you stole?" Raising to a knee, Woodward shook his head.
"I don't know what you're talking about."
He tried to stand, but Small swept his legs out from under him, and he fell back, hitting his head hard on the floor. "Stay down." He paused and walked toward the kitchen. A breakfast bar separated the 2 spaces. There he found a bottle of Johnny Walker Red Scotch with a third of its contents missing. A crystal highball glass, next to it, held ice cubes and half a glass of the amber liquid. Small picked up the glass and sniffed. There appeared to be little or no water mixed with the liquor. A little early to be drinking this shit straight, isn't it, Justin? Raising to an elbow, the younger man directed his gaze toward the ex-hitman. Mind your own fucking business. You caused me to lose my job. Wrong assessment, Justin. I didn't steal the walking sticks and then wait almost 10 years before selling one to a retail store. That one's on you. Not the brightest strategy, I might add. Woodward did not respond to the comment. Where are the rest of them? What? Small shook his head and walked back to the man now leaning on one elbow. With a swift kick, Woodward's head once again struck the carpet. Not as hard this time, but he stayed down. Now, Mr. Ex-Banker, I will ask this one more time. Where are the remaining walking sticks? Staring at the ceiling, the man folded his arms. I really don't know. Jeez, you don't have all your oars in the water, do you, dumbass? Small now stood above Woodward's head and screwed a suppressor into the barrel of the Glock. He then pointed it at the man's forehead. My patience is waning, Justin. Want to answer my question? But you're a cop. Never said I was. The man squeezed his eyes shut. Oh, shit. Yeah, that's pretty much what you're in right now. Don't make it deeper. Tell me where the walking sticks are. We sold all them. How much? Don't lie. 15,000 each. Small gave a small whistle. Damn, Woodward. No wonder you bought a BMW. Who'd you sell them to? I don't remember. Small pulled the slide back on the gun. Who? A collector who owns a plantation in Naugatush, about 250 miles from here. Naugatush? Where's that? Northwest of Lafayette. Rolling his eyes, Small gritted his teeth and snarled, Where the fuck is Lafayette? Woodward, his eyes still closed, moaned, West of Baton Rouge, follow I-49 out of Lafayette. What's the guy's name? The ex-banker told him. Small new apartments, like the one he stood in, were built on concrete slabs in swampy states like southern Louisiana, so he aimed the gun to the left of Woodward's head and pulled the trigger. The sound, no louder than dropping a book on a table, scared the man laying on the carpet. He screamed as pieces of the shattered bullet burned into his cheek. At the same time, the ex-hitman noticed a dark stain spreading at the ex-banker's crotch. It's hard to miss at this distance, Justin. Next time, I won't. The drive northwest took over 4 hours. When he arrived at the plantation, he drove by the entrance at a reduced speed. Numerous signs warned about trespassing with a reference to a local ordinance and the penalties associated with such a transgression. With the sun setting in the west, Small found a local hotel 2 miles from the palatial southern mansion. There he used his laptop to do as much research as possible about the owner. The plantation, known locally as the Barton House, possessed an interesting history dating back to its construction in 1832. Over the course of the next 20 years, the owner continued to buy more land and extend his cotton empire to over 6,000 acres. By the time the Civil War broke out in the eastern states, the Barton House cultivated one of the largest cotton harvests in the state of Louisiana. Over 200 enslaved persons toiled in the fields of this massive undertaking. The period after the war saw the plantation shrink in landmass, but not in importance to the local economy. Small discovered the current occupant could trace his ancestry back to the original owners of the land. He was not only rich, but it was old wealth, and he possessed a passion for old antiques and items associated with the mystical history of Louisiana. He also learned the man preferred to seclude himself within the plantation property and seldom ventured out. Plus, he rarely received guests or visitors. Shorty Small planned to intrude on the recluse's privacy a few minutes after midnight. During his years as a hitman, Small learned numerous techniques on how to detect alarms and intruder prevention measures. He found none on his nocturnal trek to the Barton house. A full moon provided sufficient light so as not to need his night vision goggles. From what he could see, the structure needed extensive maintenance and a heavy dose of TLC. He entered the house after finding a rear door unlocked. This gave him pause as he extracted his Glock from his shoulder holster and proceeded with additional care. The interior resembled the exterior with a serious need for a remodel. In each room he found scattered clutter, cabinet doors hanging by one hinge, the sour odor of human urine, and the sound of scurrying critters. To help him avoid stumbling over debris or animals, he extracted a small high-powered LED flashlight. Halfway to the front of the house, he detected the distinct smell of death. He emerged into an atrium near the front entrance. A male body sat on the floor, its back propped against a wall near the main door. The face appeared as if contorted in pain. The eyes were open and stared sightlessly at a point near the ceiling 2 floors above it. Small examined the body closer. As he swept the narrow beam of the flashlight over the man, he noticed 2 puncture wounds on his right hand near the joint between his thumb and index finger. The wounds were swollen, with purplish skin surrounding the puncture marks. He took a picture of the wound with his cell phone and exited the house through the front door. By noon the same day, he was back in New Orleans and showing the picture of the puncture wounds to Claire. "What do those look like to you?" She looked at the picture, frowned, and then led Small to the rear of her small jewelry and gem store. Looking at a bookshelf in her office, she extracted a book, leafed through it, stopped on a page, and handed the open volume to Small. "It looks like this made the wound." The picture she handed him was of an ornately decorated walking stick with an intricately carved snake head. With a tight smile, Small rubbed the back of his neck. "Come on, Claire, we've discussed this before. You can't be serious." "Oh, but I am, Shorty." She took the book back and flipped through more pages. "There are multiple examples of similar incidents having occurred before, only the object in question was a spear, not a walking stick." She stopped on a page and handed the book back to Small. Once again, he turned his attention to the open page before him. "Damn." She only nodded. "Okay, let's say I'm leaning toward believing you. How do I fight these things?" "That would be beyond my knowledge. You would need to consult someone who practices hoodoo." "Hoodoo?" "Yes, voodoo is a religion. Hoodoo, on the other hand, is more concerned with folklore and mysticism. A hoodoo practitioner often sees hoodoo as a sort of personal power, using their knowledge of herbs, minerals, and animals. With this knowledge and power, a practitioner can assist someone in a variety of situations, including luck, love, evil, or any particular retaliation against an enemy." "Ah, geez, Claire, where am I going to find someone like that?" She handed him a business card. "This is the address of someone who might know more than I do." After studying the card, he looked up at her. "Madame Toussaint?" "You pronounce her last name as Toussaint." "Oh." "It is important you remember that. She gets upset if you pronounce it differently." "Then she needs to spell it like it sounds." "It's French, Shorty." "Whatever." An elderly woman opened the door of a small house on the edge of the French Quarter. Small said, "Madame Toussaint?" "Yes." "I'm Shorty Small. I called earlier for an appointment." Yes, Mr. Small. Come in." Walking into the small, cramped living room, Small felt a momentary sensory overload. Every possible empty spot along 3 walls were covered by tapestries swirling with deep purples, golds, and reds. Intricate hemp-colored macrame wall hangings hung from various hooks on the ceiling. Along the remaining wall, there stood a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf which held so many volumes the wood in the middle seemed to sag. In the center of the cluttered room sat an intricately carved wood floor table surrounded by colorful pillows and rugs. Madame Toussaint said, "Please sit and I will try to answer your questions." Small felt like a giant in a land of gnomes as he struggled to get comfortable on the floor. When his host settled across from him, he opened the book Claire gave him to the page with the picture of the walking stick. "What can you tell me about these, Madame Toussaint?" She took the book and placed half-readers, which hung by a lanyard around her neck, on her nose. After she studied the picture, she closed the book, looked up at Small, and handed it back to him. "Do you seek answers of what this is, or do you seek knowledge about their purpose?" "Purpose, Madame Toussaint. These are not hoodoo, Mr. Small. They are far more sinister." "What are they used for?" "They are called assassin's canes. Have you ever heard of those, Mr. Small?" "Yes. Some have a hidden sword within the shaft. I've seen some that were hollow and used as a blowgun to fire poison darts. A few possessed a heavy grip made of lead and used as a bludgeon." "Very good. The one in the picture you showed me has the same purpose, to eliminate one's enemies." "How did the ones in the picture work?" Her eyes narrowed. "The ones you speak of are rare. I know of only a handful imported from India. They disappeared years ago." "I know of 2 men who recently purchased similar ones and both died of a snake bite." One of her hands shot up to cover her mouth. "Oh dear, where?" "One here in New Orleans and another in Natchitoches." "There were rumors of 7. Do you know where the remaining 5 might be?" Small shook his head. "You are trying to find them for the tourism board, aren't you, Mr. Small?" Trying not to show his surprise at how Madame Toussaint knew of his mission, he only nodded. "These walking sticks are a danger to anyone who holds them by the grip." "How?" A small smile came to her lips. "They are petrified king cobras, Mr. Small. Once someone claims them, they will revert to their original form and attack anyone holding the cane. Normally, the wound is fatal, as you have mentioned." "You're kidding, right?" "No, Mr. Small, I am not." "So you're saying don't touch them by the grip?" "Not if you want to live." Justin Woodward unlocked his apartment door and opened it. Before he could step in, a strong hand in the middle of his back pushed him. He stumbled and fell forward, his nose making direct contact with the living room floor. Blood gushed as he screamed. "What the hell?" Shorty Small closed and locked the front door, making sure the deadbolt was fully engaged. He waited, his Glock now pointed at the prone, bleeding man. When the ex-banker looked up, he screamed, "You! I'm gonna sue you for assault! You're a dangerous man!" Small gave the man a slight smile. "You have no idea. Now where are the remaining Cobra walking sticks?" "I told you, we sold them to a collector in Natchitoches." "He's dead. Death by snake bite." Woodward's eyes widened. "How?" "You obviously didn't know what you had, did you, Justin?" "What do you mean?" "Those walking sticks were originally from a village in India. From what I've been able to discover, they are petrified king cobras and designed to be assassin's canes, lethal to anyone who possesses them. Now, want to tell me where they are, or do you want to be charged with murder of 2 men, one of which was a famous actor?" Woodward stood and went to the kitchen and found a towel to press against his still bleeding nose. "You fucking broke my nose. I sue you." "Justin, here's a little advice for you. Shut up." "I will not shut up. This is the 2nd time you've assaulted me. I have you locked up and the key thrown away." Small sighed and started screwing the suppressor into the barrel of his Glock. "I'm going to tell you a little bit of my history, and maybe, just maybe, you'll shut up." He pulled the slide back, charging the weapon. "I'm not from New Orleans, asshole. I'm from Chicago. I made my living for a long time, solving personnel problems for rich and powerful men. My solutions were permanent. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" The ex-banker's eyes grew wide as he finally understood who Shorty Small was. You're a hitman? I hate that word, but so your feeble mind can actually grasp your situation? Yes. Shit. There you go again. Are you finally figuring out how deep you are in it? A slow nod came from the man with the bleeding nose. Now, Justin, want to tell me where the remaining 5 walking sticks are? I wish I knew. What does that mean? Woodward removed the towel from his face. Blood still dripped. He rinsed the towel and then pressed it once again on his now crooked nose. It means we sold them on eBay. You have records of where you shipped them to, don't you? The man shrugged. Small pointed the suppressed Glock in Woodward's direction and pulled the trigger. The bullet missed the banker's ear by several inches and slammed into the refrigerator. You probably won't get your deposit back now. Are you crazy? Maybe, but I'm the person with a gun pointed at you. Raising the palm of his unused hand towards Small, Woodward took a deep breath through his mouth. Don't. I tell you. Good. I'm getting tired of your constant lying. They were shipped out of state to a collector in Texas. Why do I not believe you? I'm not lying. Where in Texas? Woodward hesitated for a second before saying, Houston. The Glock spat again, this time nicking the ex-banker's left ear. Now blood dripped from both his nose and ear, running down his face. The gasp he emitted sounded more animal than human. Okay, just don't shoot again. Small growled. Last chance, Justin. Where are they? Storage unit near Lake Pontchartrain on the east side of the airport. Address? The banker gave him the address and unit number. Just before Small opened the apartment door, he turned. If you're lying or remove the canes before I get there, it will be the last thing you ever do, Justin. Capiche? The banker slowly nodded his head. Homer LaCroix met Small in the same coffee shop they always used for meetings. The big man arrived first and watched the lanky man enter the shop. When he sat down, he gave the ex-hitman a smile. So, you found the walking sticks? Yeah, they're in a storage unit near the airport. I cut the old lock off with a bolt cutter and put a new one on. He handed LaCroix a key. This opens the lock. The tall man did not reach for the offered item. Did you make sure they were there? Small nodded. Why didn't you just take them? With a half smile, the larger man said, You asked me to find them. I found them. You didn't say anything about taking them somewhere. Well, the tourism board wants them delivered to this address. He slid a business card across the table. Small looked at it but did not pick it up. Apparently, you and the tourism board don't understand what these canes are for, do you? LaCroix frowned. The old canes worth a lot of money. The board wants to sell them and recuperate for expenses incurred. In other words, the board hasn't a clue what they are. Okay, shorty. They know they are old and valuable. Other than that, what's so special about them? Homer, I might have been born at night, but it wasn't last night. The board is spending way too much money on getting these things back just because they are old and supposedly valuable. Which they aren't. Want to try again? After drumming his fingers on the table where they sat, LaCroix gave Small a half smile. I told him you were a smart guy. They know exactly what they are and how they work. They are, let's say, individuals who oppose the current members of the board. Our employer wants to offer each one of these individuals one of the canes as a peace offering. Small threw his head back and laughed out loud. He then grew serious and looked LaCroix in the eyes. So, they want me to deliver them. Is that what I'm hearing? A nod was his answer. No fucking way. Small stood and tossed the key to the storage unit at LaCroix. Guess you guys need to find another patsy. As the big man made a step toward the coffee shop door, LaCroix said, $50K in cash. if you deliver the canes to the address on the card." The ex-hitman froze and turned back to the tall, lanky man. "50K? Another nod. "When?" "As soon as possible." "Not that when. When do I get paid?" A thick white envelope appeared out of LaCroix's jacket and he placed it on the surface in front of him. Small returned to his chair and the envelope disappeared under the table. "When do they want the canes delivered?" "No later than midnight tonight." Remembering something Madame Toussaint mentioned, he said, "I'll figure out a way." When he arrived at the storage unit, the lock he placed there earlier no longer remained. He raised the door and found the entire unit empty. Returning to his SUV, he drove straight to Woodward's apartment. The BMW owned by the ex-banker was nowhere to be seen. Parking his vehicle, Small walked to the front door of the man's apartment and used a small tool from his wallet to pick the flimsy lock. Inside, he withdrew his Glock and searched all of the rooms. No one at home. A laptop occupied a desk in one of the spare bedrooms. Small touched the spacebar and the screen brightened. As he looked closer, an email program revealed the last message opened. The ex-hitman read it, smiled, and returned to his car, leaving the door to the apartment unlocked and slightly ajar. The drive to Baton Rouge took an hour and a half. The sun, low in the sky, would set soon, and dusk would aid him in the next task. Once he pulled into the parking lot of the warehouse owned by Woodward, he saw the BMW X5 parked next to a door. No other vehicles occupied the parking area. Before exiting his Ford Escape, he screwed the suppressor into the Glock. Checking to make sure the gun was charged, he exited, walked quickly to the door where the BMW was parked, and tried the knob. When it turned in his hand, he shook his head slowly and entered. Woodward stood hunched over a wooden crate on a workbench 15 yards from the entrance. He looked up as Small entered the room. His eyes locked on the Glock pointed at him. "Not you again?" "I thought I told you to leave those things where they were." "You have no idea how valuable they are, Small, and they aren't yours. Get out." Moving toward the middle of the space, Small kept the Glock pointed at Woodward. "Stand aside, Justin. You might actually get out of here alive." With a swift move not expected by the big man, the ex-banker reached into the wood crate and tossed an object toward Small. Stepping aside, the walking stick passed him on the right and fell to the concrete floor with a clatter. As Woodward threw another cane toward him, Small pulled the trigger on the Glock. His aim being true, snapped the shaft in two, and the pieces fell to the floor. Woodward screamed as one of the last canes in the wooden box came alive. The snake raised its head above the crate and hissed at Woodward. Frozen by surprise, the ex-banker stood mesmerized by the serpent's swaying head. It then hissed and struck out toward the man's hand, which still hovered unmoved above the container. Small watched as the snake clamped its fangs into the joint of the man's hand between the index finger and the thumb. Woodward looked on with horror as the snake released his hand and seemed to leap toward the man's head. As the cobra sunk its teeth into the soft tissue of his neck, Woodward's eyes rolled upward out of view and he fell to the concrete floor. The snake stiffened and dissolved into a white and gray powder as Shorty Small looked on. He walked over to the crate and looked in. One last walking stick remained. He then gathered the one he shot into and placed the pieces in the crate, being careful to avoid the grip of the cane. He then retrieved the one thrown at him. Holding it by the tip of the shaft, he also placed it in the crate. Using a hammer and nails already on the workbench, he placed the lid on the container and secured it. He then carried the closed box to his SUV. Before he left the parking lot, he locked the door of the warehouse and made sure it was closed. At 5 minutes to midnight, he delivered the crate with the remaining walking sticks to the address given to him by LaCroix. 2 days later, LaCroix waited at their usual table at the coffee shop, sipping his beverage as Small walked through the door. As the big man sat, LaCroix said, "What happened?" "I delivered the walking sticks before midnight." "Yes, I was told. There were only 3 and one was broken." Small's mouth twitched. "I used one to protect myself." The lanky man nodded. "Once again, the tourism board is pleased with your work. The banker who stole them can be located. They want to have him placed under arrest." "No need. Where do you think the missing walking stick went? He won't be stealing anything again. LaCroix sipped his coffee and smiled.
Chilling tales for dark nights.